Hi guys, welcome to Love and Lust audiobooks channel, updated daily with great audiobooks. So please subscribe to me if you don't want to miss it.
Well, let's go to read this book. Seducing My Older Alpha Mate, Chapter 1 to 15.
Chapter 1, Day in the Life. Alice's pause. Look at you, ugly bitch. Show us what you are. I sighed as I put down the bucket of dirty, greasy water, watching Olivia charging towards me. Had she not learned enough to leave me alone? How may I help you, Princess Olivia? I greeted her as politely as I could. It was a joke. She and I were both the Alpha King's daughter, yet she was a princess. But I was treated like the lowest maid. Ugly bitch, how dare you look at me? While Olivia approached, I found there was a tiny wound on her forehead. She just ended today's training, probably with the new royal teacher. She was wretched in every sense of the word. When she suffered, all hell broke loose, and there was no doubt that she definitely was looking to make me suffer too. That was how it was here. I was no one, and my life meant nothing. Bitch, didn't you hear me? Before I could respond, she slapped me hard across the face, sending me rolling down the stairs. My body felt like I had been obliterated, and every bone in my body seemed misaligned. The loud noise made everyone else in the banquet hall look over, but they were used to it. And only Olivia's suitors whistled. As the first daughter of the Alpha King, I should be taken good care of and respected by everyone in the royal palace. However, things couldn't be more opposite. I was seen as a disgrace to the royal family, all because I was born without a wolf. Therefore, even the lowest servant in the palace would torture me. Most shifters experienced their first transformation when they turned 18. Unfortunately, I couldn't. As far as I knew, my mother was a human doctor who was brought to the palace by the Alpha King. If she hadn't rescued Alpha King in the forest back then, perhaps our fates could have been changed. She was dead because of me. If I wasn't born, maybe she'd still be alive. Olivia walked down the staircase and swayed over to me. She was looking down at me with pure and unfiltered hatred. She opened her mouth to speak when a young man approached her and placed his hand on her arm. Dear, don't hurt your hand. She is just a low maid who doesn't deserve your attention. You need to deal with the wound on your head. Simon put you through a lot today, and you deserve some rest. He must have been a young alpha from one of the other packs. The new teacher's strictness has made many people feel pity toward Olivia, especially the alpha sons of other packs who only continue to fuel the fire of her ever-burning narcissism. Olivia pulled her arm away and sneered with pride, glaring down on me. As I tried to stand, she used her foot to push me back down. You've got it all wrong, Sir Elwin. She's not just a lowly servant. Let me introduce her to you. She is my dear sister, Alice. I grunted and struggled to lift myself from under her step, but Olivia simply smiled at the pain she was causing on me, with her heel pressing into my chest. Then she released her hold, causing me to gasp. But thankful this was the worst you got. She sneered before lifting the hem of her beautiful dress and stepping aside. She wasn't done. Olivia was never going to be tired of humiliating me in front of everyone, especially when there were newcomers. I heard the strangers' gasps when I finally found my footing and they saw my face. They were shocked. My sister is beautiful, isn't she? Olivia said as she grabbed my chin tightly in her hand. Yes, no, she is horrid. She's no match for you at all. How can she be your sister? That's an insult to you. The men flattered Olivia, but their eyes were on me secretly. Olivia glared at them, making some of them laugh awkwardly. My sister is a beauty, she continued. However, she is a disgrace to our royal family. Olivia jerked my jaw away like she was throwing away something dirty and made me fall back to the ground. Then she did what I feared was coming all along. I heard her announce the famous truth disdainfully. My sister Alice was born a shifter without a wolf, she said loudly, smirking as she did. The questions flooded in all at once. Why doesn't she have a wolf? Can't she shift? The guys looked at me unscrupulously as if they wanted to see through me, use me for their own sick and twisted desires. A beautiful weak girl in a crowd was like a piece of fresh meat in a pack of hungry wolves. I don't know why my dear sister can't shift, Olivia stated, putting a little pity behind her tone. Perhaps she is hiding her wolf. Do you want to see her shift? She knew I wasn't born with a wolf, but that didn't stop her. I was merely nothing but a joke. The young alphas cheered and then walked toward us. Their footsteps shook the stairs slightly as they started to crowd around us. Why isn't she in training if she's a shifter? Is she so strong that she doesn't need training? Oh, maybe she's like Mr. Simon Hubba. Their laughter was deafening and almost toppled the roof with how loud it roared. Who knows? Olivia smiled. Mr. Simon can fight us without shifting. Maybe my sister is also gifted. I stood frozen and tried to tune out their taunts. I tried to focus on something, anything, knowing the rage would soon force me to shift. But it was too late. A huge pain pierced through my palm. I trembled and tried desperately to pull my hand away, but Olivia mercilessly grabbed it roughly, squeezing to cause more discomfort.
Tears welled up uncontrollably in the corners of my eyes, and I struggled harder.
I'm helping you shift, Alice, shift, right now, Olivia demanded. She then pulled me close and whispered in my ear with her sweet and soft voice. Don't you want to fight back? Olivia sneered. Who do you think you are, Mr. Simon? I'm warning you. Just because he can defeat us without shifting doesn't mean a lowly omega like you can do it as well. I didn't answer her. My gaze moved, and I saw the bucket I had set at the edge of the staircase starting to lose its balance from the cheers and people pressing into it. If only it would go a little bit further, maybe? Olivia, your sister can't shift. It's too hard for her. You should let her go, one of the young alphas said. Oh, Alice, do you want to leave? I can let you go if you beg me. I know you are good at begging for mercy, Olivia taunted. I knew what she wanted to see, and now it was the time. Princess Olivia, my voice was weak, broken, and barely anything but a whisper. I threw my head up, my face covered in tears, as I bit at the corners of my lips. This was her favorite look to see on my face. No matter how many times I showed such an expression, she would be fooled. What do you say? She moved closer to me unconsciously, trying to hear what I was saying. She wanted to hear me throw in the towel, eagerly waiting with bated breath for her moment to shine. Our father, the Alpha King, valued her as much as he valued me as an alpha. Her abilities were less than outstanding, especially in combat. Other than her terrible personality, it was another reason she repeatedly humiliated me to prove herself. She sneered at me. I was tired of playing this game. It was time for it to end.
3, 2, 1.
I said, I whispered, take care. Olivia screamed and jumped. The bucket finally fell and splashed as it rolled down the steps, covering her entire dress in hot, scalding water. Although it didn't burn her face, the oil stains certainly made Olivia uncomfortable.
It burns, she screamed. I can't feel anything. It burned.
The young alphas rushed to Olivia, all trying to help her clean herself. This was my moment. I didn't waste any more time and slipped out of the banquet hall before anyone noticed me. When I stopped to check my body, I found that my hand was swollen and I also had a scrape on my back. I cursed under my breath. It was an injury, but less than what I'd experienced in the past. This kind of torture happened every day in the beginning. I was badly injured and almost died several times. But as I got older, I learned to prepare for these scenarios and protect myself as best as I can. My acting skills became more proficient, and I was able to get hurt less by playing to the vanity of those around me. It was a skill that had saved me several times, and one that I had come to cherish. In the werewolf palace, I was a nobody weaker than the weakest Omega and no different from a human being. Everyone ignored me, despised me, and harassed me in the eyes of other shifters. I was not accepted and blessed by their moon goddess despite my lineage. I was worthless and just another long forgotten mistake. After a life of torment, I learned to not care and focus my goal on one day leaving this place in search of a new life. The only one who cared about me and protected me was Joan. She was the cook in the palace, a human woman who applied to work in the werewolf palace 18 years ago. No one knew where she was from, but she had a special connection to my birth mother. When I entered the kitchen, my heart warmed at the sight of her. Dear, why did it take so long for you to get the bucket? Anything happened? Joan asked me worriedly. I hid my hand behind my back. She didn't need to see this. Nothing happened. I just fell and had to clean up the mess. It was nothing. It didn't calm her. Joan grabbed my shoulder anxiously and looked at me nervously. Are you hurt? No, the bucket is broken, but I'm okay. I tried to force a smile to deter her, but she only stared at me for a little longer. I could tell she didn't fully believe me, but she had learned to let it go too. To her, I was her entire world, and to me, she was mine, which is also why I tried my best to hide my dark side from her. She was a kind human woman, and they were wolves. The last thing I wanted was for her to be caught up in my life. She sighed. Okay, if the bucket broke, I'll go buy a new one tomorrow. But yeah, you should go to bed now. There's a reason they call it beauty sleep. But she turned me around and pushed me out the door. Only I had a glimpse of the mountain of dirty discs and forks in the sink. Whoever this royal teacher was, he must have been good at his job. He had attracted several young alphas to the area, ready to train and increase their abilities, and in turn caused me and Joan a whole lot more work than usual. No, it's you who should have a rest. I am young, so I can work longer, I said, shaking my head. She pulled me into a loving and tender hug, and I let my body relax into it. I felt safe, secure, and that was hard to come by here. I hugged her back and whispered, if only I were your daughter. I want to be a human. Joan, you already are Alice, and you are my daughter, whatever you are. She let go and stood back, admiring me. I can't believe how much you've grown up. You looked so small when I first saw you, she said, her eyes softening, coaxing Joan away in a coquettish way. I smiled. I'll go. You've been working hard. Let me take care of this. Joan smiled and kissed my cheek goodnight. She knew better than to argue with me. When I set my mind to something, I was determined to get it. Once she retreated, I wrapped my swollen hands in a tarp. It would subside quickly, but until then, I didn't want it to get wet. I rolled up my sleeves and began to wash up, and by the time I finished, it was close to midnight. I wiped my hands on my apron to dry them, but stopped when a tingling sensation trailed up my arms from my fingertips. Oh no, not now, please, not now. I rushed to my room and slammed the door behind me, almost instantly falling onto the floor. Chapter 2, A Grave Mistake. Alice's pot. Trigger warning. This chapter contains mention of and light depiction of sexual abuse. Please read at your own discretion. Olivia knew of my inability to shift fully, but no one knew how truly excruciating it was. In great pain, my hands transformed from human to elongated wolf claws, and my teeth became sharp and pointed canine. Such horrid changes happened to me almost every night, and I hated it because it reminded me of my true nature, of who I was, not who I wanted and pretended to be. I never fully shifted, at least not fully. That could only happen if I had a sentient wolf. As such, these features only brought me pain and shame. They told me I was an alien, a monster not meant to be alive. My nails and teeth were still growing. They pierced my lips and skin, leaving bloody wounds as gray wolf hairs began to appear on my face. They burrowed out of my cheeks, making my face heated. My bones changed. They grew out of shape, making it impossible for me to lie upright in bed. I jumped out of bed in pain, and in that instant, I saw me in the mirror next to the bed. A monster with wolf hair on its face, huge wolf claws in its hands, 8 inches long, gray nails as sharp as a scimitar, and a slender waist arched painfully, as if something was about to pop out of its back. Its face was deformed by the growth of teeth. Its mouth was open in pain, and its silver eyes filled with tears. Its bare skin was covered with blood from her face and hands. It looks like an ugly, disgusting, cursed, and nightmarish monster. No, it's not me. I slapped the mirror down in horror, and it fell to the ground and shattered into thousands of pieces, each reflecting my trembling, ugly appearance. The moonlight shone in from the window and fell on the smooth and flat mirror surface, each mirror fragment shining like a unique crystal gem, like the ice castle of the Ice Queen. But their beautiful surface reflected the ugly mirror. I can't accept that. My paws trembled and crossed, and a flash of determination flashed in my eyes. I roughly broke my nails, which would hurt me more, but suppress any further deformities from showing. It's hard for me when I finally succeed. There was severe pain in my hands, and I bit down on my lip to suppress the cries. Eventually, the ugly wolf claws retreated into bloody white fingernails before my eyes, and I could tell it had subsided. This was the only way I found to prevent myself from turning into some sort of hybrid creature. I couldn't let anyone see me in this form. It was like showing my deformity and ugliness to people. Even the weakest werewolf could control themselves to maintain either a human form or wolf form. But with me, I had no choice. It was like something had taken over and had a will of its own. I fell on the bed, covered in sweat, and only after the wave of pain passed did I have the strength to get up. I needed to clean myself off out of my bedroom window. I could see one of the nearby lake. I stood and straightened my apron just in case anyone saw me and headed outside. In the moonlight, the coolness of the lake eased the pain in my hands. New nails grew gradually. At least there was one benefit to my ability. After a while, my hands became smooth and flawless again. If it were in the human world, these would be considered normal. But in the werewolf world, claws signified strength and power, and anything less was considered a disgrace. I often asked Jones about the human world. She told me that although humans were not as strong as werewolves, they had various fighting skills and smart minds. Jones was the only reason I had stayed here for so long. I don't know if I'd make it alone. When I questioned Jones about why she remained in the palace, she would often avoid answering, often stating that she had her reasons for never returning. But in place of a response, Jones lent me books that my mother had left me to help me learn more about the human world and all its beauty. Someday I'd be there. Looking at the swaying lake, I thought about my near impossible future. When there was a sound of staggering footsteps behind me, I quickly turned back and saw James, the son of the Alpha King, and my titular brother. Judging by his swaying steps and blank expression, he was drunk, clearly so drunk that when he saw me, he didn't recognize me and treated me like a normal maid, who he could put his dirty eyes on and fool with. Beauty, he asked, slurring his words. Wah, are you here? Are you waiting for me? James grunted and hiccuped, and he looked at me with bright eyes. He staggered and stretched out his hand, trying to lean on my shoulder, but I escaped his touch. I could smell the alcohol on him. It reeked the sounds of a party just a little north echoed through the night, and it was clear where he had come from. The party for the sons of the Alpha. They were all horrible, simply using their rank and status to win over anyone who they came into contact with. In just 1 month, almost every maid had been harassed by them. I looked at him in utter disgust and pushed him to leave. It was better for him that I didn't engage. However, he grasped my sleeve and stared directly into my soul. Beauty, you're so sexy. Come on, let me have a taste. He whispered into my gray hair just below my ear. James's hot breath hit my skin, making me sick. This wasn't the first time he'd done this to me or any female, but it would soon be his last. If James was found drowned in the lake tomorrow, I wouldn't feel guilty. He deserved it. He reached for me again, holding on to me tighter as I tried to wiggle my arm free. Oh, she's feisty. I like feisty ones. They make things so much more interesting, don't you think? His grip was heavy, and I knew that a bruise would appear sooner rather than later. I struggled to get out of it, but he was much stronger. His eyes darkened as he stared at me. Don't play coy, maid. We both know you'd love nothing more than to sleep with the Alpha King's son, and here I am giving you that chance. Take it. His hand slithered its way up the base of my servant's dress and grasped at my thigh. I said, "Take it," he growled as he squeezed. That was the final straw. I lifted my foot and kicked in between his legs. He dodged at the last minute and pulled me down with him to the ground. His heavy body pressed against me, and I could feel his hardness against my lower abdomen. Shit, I needed to get free, but he wasn't going to let me go without a fight. I struggled, but he pinned my arms tightly above my head by the wrist. I only had my legs left, so I kicked at him with my feet. This infuriated him, and he pressed harder against me with his legs and tried to put himself in place as he undid the button on his pants. He bent down to kiss me, but my head swung desperately, and his face instead landed on the grass. My skin was crawling, and I couldn't help but vomit. "You bitch, now listen here. If you don't want to die, you must pleasure me," he threatened as he grabbed a rock beside us and held it an inch above my head. I closed my eyes, and when I opened them again, I stopped moving and softened my voice, making it shake. If I could play to his ego, maybe I could get away from this from him. I'm sorry, sir. I'm willing to please you, Mr. James, but you made me ache. You've drunk too much. Please, let me help you. At this, you lowered the rock away from me and smirked. You should be like this earlier. I know you maids like to play and have to give a lesson. Let's start with you sucking my dick. He growled as he stood up and began to shimmy out of his slack. At this moment, I was finally free. I stood up and shoved him backwards, sending him flying into the lake. The water in the lake was cold and heavy, and since James was still drunk, he had trouble accessing his ability to swim. He flopped around, trying to keep his head above water, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy it. I saw him struggling in the water and stared at him with clear hatred. "You bitch," he screamed out, gurgling at the water that started to fill his mouth as he spoke. "My father will hear about this, and you'll be fired. Do you hear me?" "Yeah, fired." "Fired?" I laughed. "Sure, if you can live long enough to go tell him. I give you what? 5 minutes in that state, in the water." Moonlight painted my face like an angel of mercy as I watched him stumble, trying to get out over and over again. I walked closer to the water's edge and watched karma overtake him. They weren't kidding when they said revenge was sweet. Should I help? Probably. Would I? It was still very debatable. Just then, there was a sound of steady footsteps in the nearby corridor. I listened as they got closer and closer, and the clicking against the cobblestone transferred to the swaying of grass as they approached. I turned my head and saw a tall figure walking out of the darkness. The moonlight illuminated a pair of indifferent hazel eyes and I knew exactly who it was. Simon, the new royal teacher. Even though I had met him, I heard about him from the various maids. They were consistently giddy over his appearance, and now seeing him, I couldn't understand why. He was tall and wore an all-black suit. His dark, slick-backed hair accentuated his chiseled jawline, making him stand out among the crowd. Although his eyes were light brown, you could see nothing but coldness shrouded with a little mystery. Then I remembered the scene in front of me. Shit, if he saw the Alpha King's son screaming in the water and me standing here not helping, I'd be utterly destroyed. By the time I turned around, James was almost completely sunken under, with only the top of his head showing. If I waited any longer, there would be no waves on the lake, and I'd be free of at least one of these horrible people. Perhaps I could delay a little. I splashed water on my face, quickly messed up my clothes, and fell to the ground, my body concealing James in the lake. Simon approached and stopped in front of me without missing a beat. Tears rolled down my eyes. "Help me, sir," I begged him, shivering like a bullied little animal. The moonlight shone on my face, making me look even more vulnerable and enabling me to play right into his hand. Soon, just like every other pitiful male in this place, he'd be swooned by a damsel in distress, and I'd be rid of James. Finally, Simon raised an eyebrow and spoke. His voice was low and husk. "And how exactly do you want me to help you?" There was a tinge of flirtation in his voice. Bingo, little by little, his shadow enveloped me, and his scent clung to me, reeking of sweat and natural pheromones. I could even feel his burning gaze dancing over my bare skin. Men were really all the same. I opened my mouth to reply when I was met with his stone, eyes inches from my face. Chapter 3, Dangerous Game. Alice's paw. His light brown eyes shone in the moonlight like a pair of crystal, clear amber stones. They were clean and beautiful, but there was no desire inside. Tears purled in my eyes, but I forgot how to react. I forgot everything I had taught myself over the years on how to defend myself from people like James, like Olivia. He was dangerously close and somehow was leaning closer. Why wasn't I stopping him? I could feel his hot breath spread over my ears and neck, creating tiny sparks in my body. I shivered. "Little girl, you are playing a dangerous game," he whispered in my ear. His warm lips almost touched my ears as the heat of his breath surrounded me. I should have felt threatened, but I was too stunned at what he said. Dangerous game. The next moment, before I could react, his hand grasped my wrist, and he pushed me to the side. My knee scratched against some stones on the ground, and I was entirely covered in dirt and fallen leaves. "Well, fuck," I muttered to myself while also letting out a small string of curse words. Then I remembered James. He was going to find him, and I was going to be the one at fault. I jumped quickly to my feet. The lake was stirred, and I heard the sound of something being lifted to the surface. I quickly turned around, only to find James was saved by Simon. Simon's straight suit was instantly soaked from diving into the lake, and it clung tightly to his body, showing his tall and slender figure even more as he carried James out of the water bridal style. On the other hand, James was out cold. Simon threw him on the ground and began to perform CPR. Eventually, James's body twitched and he sat up, spitting out enough water to enable him to breathe. Great. As usual, luck is never on my side. My gaze slowly fell on Simon's face. I couldn't imagine the consequences if Simon spoke out against me. Even if James didn't remember it was me, my life was at stake, no matter how vile and downright useless James was. He was still the Alpha King's son, and I was a no one. I didn't know what to do. Should I try to fool Simon again? No, he wasn't. Like the several other guys lurking around here whose eyes were glued to me, like I was their property, their birthright. So should I run? Impossible. I couldn't possibly run past a powerful alpha next to the Alpha King. It was possible that Simon was just as powerful. My hands clenched into fists unconsciously, and my palms were wet with sweat. I didn't know what I could do in the face of absolute power. All my usual tactics were worthless. But I didn't want to die. I hadn't had the chance to leave the palace yet to see the human world. And if I died, who would care for Joan? I stood there immobile as the cold wind blew through my body, making me shiver. But I didn't move my gaze. Simon's attention was still on James. I didn't know what he was going to do with me. I couldn't let my guard down. My brain was racing to find a solution, but my eyes were only looking at Simon. His eyes were so beautiful, like the amber stone necklace that Joan gave me last year. But the necklace was snatched by Olivia, and although I later left Olivia covered in rashes for more than a month, the necklace was never recovered. When Olivia got a better one, she threw mine into the swamp, never to be seen again. Goddess, I hated her. I hated them all. Then my mind registered what was happening in front of me. Simon picked James up and left without even speaking to or looking at me. Wait, I anxiously blurted out to tempt Simon from leaving. My clothes were scratched and my hair was messy with fallen leaves. I had wounds on my knees and my face had undried tears compared to a holy and beautiful angel. I was now more like a clown whose dark inner was sliced open to reveal her ugly, true nature. I wanted revenge. I wanted to kill everyone who bullied me. I wanted to destroy this damn place. Fuck shifter life. I just want to start a new one in the human world with Joan away from all of this. I wanted to be normal. But if I let Simon leave, the next day I'd be dead. There was no questions about it. I couldn't let that happen. I stopped him as if completely unaware of this man's danger and power. I was so small in front of him that I could feel his indifferent eyes falling on me as if he saw through everything about me. Why did you save him? I asked Simon angrily. To protect myself, I often swallowed my anger, playing the role of a kind and honest girl that everyone could bully. But deep down, I was much more than that. I was cunning and deceitful when I needed to be. And the people here were none the wiser. Only now there was a person who had found my true face and turned a blind eye to it. I couldn't deny that. It intrigued me, but it also infuriated me. Why was James born alpha and enjoying everything? He didn't even care for the job and treated everyone like shit unless they served him a purpose. Yet he would always be saved. My eyes were hot, but not a single tear dared to come out. When I was truly hurt, I couldn't cry. Tears were my weapon, but they were also the reason they insulted me more. James is my student, Simon said, as he swiftly caught a sliding James with his arm like catching a sack. His voice was cold and his eyes detached. Then it clicked. He thought I was a standard servant. He had no idea of my lineage. So the answer was enough. It was my turn to give way to him, but I didn't move. He looked at me with oppressive eyes, but I stood still. The moonlight shone on my face, and I knew I most likely looked ridiculous right now. If Simon insisted on going, how could I stop him to kill me? He didn't need to lift a single finger. I was nothing in his eyes. My beauty, my wit, and my attack meant nothing. Will you kill me? I lifted my eyelids to look at him. I didn't even realize it. My voice was shaking. You are playing a dangerous game. However, it's nothing to do with me, he stated. So it was true. He saved James only because he was his student. It was said that Alpha King invited him to train his children and the other sons of various alphas because he was good at fighting, especially against abnormal rogues who were usually 2 or 3 times the size of a normal shifter. Each abnormal rogue was said to have the power of an alpha. However, each one of them was mad. None were sentient, and they would fight until their death. No one knew where they came from, but they were the biggest threat to the shifter world. I always hated my shifter side. It reminded me too much of how broken I really was, how useless. I even couldn't protect myself. How did I plan on protecting Joan, too? Why couldn't I have a teacher as powerful as Simon? If I could be stronger, it would be easy for me to leave this place and never look back. Then I had an idea. I can be your student, too, I proclaimed. I'm also a daughter of the Alpha King. I would grasp any and every chance to leave the palace, no matter what I needed to do or say. James spat and groaned, and Simon made a disgusted face, holding him away from him. You are too weak, he noted simply. My face contorted. Excuse me, the girl who continuously fended for herself, who taught herself how to survive, was too weak. I couldn't believe what I just heard. What did you say? I asked, just to make sure I heard him right. Simon seemed to be losing patience. He tossed James down on the ground despite his cries of pain and walked towards me. His light brown eyes shone like freshly boiled syrup as he approached me, but I couldn't look at them for a long time. Instead of making me feel warm and sweet, they made me feel dangerous and cold. My jaw tightened. I don't care who you are, he said, low and firm, but I won't accept a student who is as weak as you. It is a waste of time. I'm not interested in what's going on between you and James. So would you please step aside so I can take him inside? A chill ran down my spine. He walked back to James, picked him back up, and pushed past me mercilessly. The tingling pain in my knee made me lose my balance slightly, and I wobbled before getting myself straight. The wind from the lake blew my hair down my face, and a strand stuck to my mouth, the bitterness of the lakeside soil and leaf juice soaking it entirely. I clenched my teeth and my hands. How dare he? My anger was building and made me hurl insults in the direction of his departure. Weak. Yeah, I screamed after him, I will be strong one day, and when I am, you'll regret ever saying that to me. But before I could even finish my last sentence, he was gone, and there was nothing left except me and the sounds of nature at night. Chapter 4, Who Are You? Alice's Pavley. The next day, I walked down the hallway leading to the kitchen. Along the way, I heard all the palace maids talking about James falling into the water the night before. Their voices low, but still nowhere near a whisper. Do you hear, Prince James fell into the lake in the garden last night and was saved by the royal teacher, Mr. Simon. It's the most exciting news of the morning. One of the maids squealed. Another chimed in. No way. I wonder who did it. Pushed Prince James in to say. Hush, a third voice demanded. Don't speak too loud. Prince James is still a prince despite his awful attitude. We should be careful of what we say. Yeah, absolutely. The first stated, I'm happy he was saved, but I just want to know who did such an amazing thing. Is it some girl abandoned by him?
I bet it was revenge.
It's a mystery, the third woman answered. I guess we'll never know. Even he doesn't know who did it. Says he has no memory whatsoever. But then why was Mr. Simon there?
That's not something we should be asking about. The second stated the Alpha King asked us to entertain him with the highest courtesy. Don't you remember that?
Of course I remember, said the first, but I think Mr. Simon is even more strict than the Alpha King. I can't imagine he would save Prince James if he saw something that he shouldn't have. Here, you mean Mr. Simon should let Prince James die? No, I don't say that, the first exclaimed. I served Mr. Simon when he just came here. I admit that he is handsome and elegant and no one can deny his charms, but I didn't dare to look him in the eye. That's just because you are too timid, the second taunted. If I get the opportunity to serve him, I will just wake up laughing. Finally, the women left, and I was left standing in shock. Simon said nothing about why Jill fell into the water. The news should make me elated, but for some reason I was pissed He kept his word. He really had no interest in me, perhaps. He just forgot. But how could I let something like this happen if he could keep his word? So I would make him teach me no matter what he thought he wanted. In the following days, James fell ill as a result of his near-death experience. Due to this, the training sessions were suspended and the young alphas left the palace and returned to their packs. At least I wouldn't have to worry about them anymore. It also lightened my and Joan's workload. James's scandal spread to the surrounding packs with the departure of the young alphas. After all, for shifters, getting drunk and falling into the water and almost dying as a result was not a glorious thing. Not to mention, James was the prince of the Alpha King in this case. The Alpha King was thankful for the rescue of his son. It even made Simon more popular in the palace and nearby packs. Wherever I went, I could hear his name. Bing. The sound of the disc falling to the ground and shattering into pieces was enormous, like a thunderclap coming from James's room. I could hear his voice down the hall and walked to his door, peering through the crack. Simon, Simon. Why does everyone talk about Simon all the time? He is a rogue who is not taken in by a pack. How can he be our teacher? Oh, this is all ludicrous. I'm the prince. How could I be in a bad enough mood to drink myself silly? And if I didn't drink, how could I even fall into the water? Now I'm being laughed at. James cursed as he lay on the bed. According to the healer, he needed to remain there for at least a week. Years of drinking and pleasure make his body weaker than a normal alpha's. However, he would never admit it. All he wanted was power, and whoever provoked him would be scolded. I was not at all surprised by James's ingratitude. This was James, a stupid and selfish prince. I didn't know if Alpha King knew if his son was like this, but apparently he didn't raise his children with his heart. In this case, his attitude towards Simon was intriguing. The Alpha King seemed to respect and fear Simon. Why? My thoughts were cut down by William, the Alpha King's nephew, who tried to have James calm down. Stop, James, you need to rest. William's voice was full of helplessness. He was the only young alpha who stayed at the palace when the sessions were suspended. As the heir of the strongest pack, Opal Moon Pack, William had a close relationship with the palace, and he was also the best friend of James, although in my opinion, he was not as stupid as James. Rest. How do I rest when everyone is laughing at me and praising Simon? Yeah, James roared, and even though I was outside the door, I could feel his anger. I know you don't like Mr. Simon, I don't either, but both of our fathers think he is stronger than us. This is why they invited him to be our teacher, and I have to admit that he is experienced in fighting with those alienated rogues. He shuddered as he said it, and James laughed. Alienated rogues, come on, they are just normal rogues. We have had fights with rogues so many times. Why do we need him telling us what to do? They are not normal rogues, James. Better. Those alienated rogues killed your mom, the Luna, 10 years ago. And your mom was also a strong alpha. William pointed out to James, and this time, James kept silent. My eyes narrowed. I knew the attack that happened 10 years ago. It wasn't a wonderful memory since I was the only survivor. I lost the mood to continue listening, put down the food in my hand, and turned to leave. Delivering food to James was not a wonderful errand. Every time I would be humiliated by him, he would vent his bad temper on anyone lower in rank than him. I chose not to touch his mold today. Then I heard James ask something intriguing, and I stopped in my tracks. William, Simon was recommended by your father, and he first lived in your pack. Do you know nothing about his past? William shook his head. I know nothing about him. He is a mystery, and he never reveals his past to anyone. Goddess, how dare my father to invite such a person into the palace and even make him our teacher? James growled. I sighed and decided to continue walking away. My main purpose was not to bring food to Jill. I wanted to get some information about Simon, and now it seemed that my goal was not achieved. I'd have to go to Simon directly. These days, I got the opportunity to deliver food to Simon. However, every time I could say something, he asked me to leave since it was the rule he made to maids who served him. He didn't like others coming into his room. The Alpha King gave Simon a relatively separate palace to live in. He didn't live in the main palace with others. Whenever I walked into this palace, it felt empty. Simon was the only person who lived here. I didn't see him because he didn't come out to get the food. Instead, he asked me to leave it outside the door. I tried to hide and waited for him to come out, but he always knew I didn't leave, and then proceeded to ask me to do so. The question remained, how would I get him to teach me? I thought I could find a way, but Simon wouldn't let it be easy. This time, as usual, I knocked on the door 3 times, but no one answered. Strange, although Simon kept a distance from all the maids, he was polite and still had manners. Somewhat. He wouldn't let anyone wait for a long time. Maybe he wasn't here. Then a bold idea broke into my head. Perhaps I could sneak in if I could find something to use as leverage. He'd have to teach me. The thought made my heart pound. But by the time I reacted, I was already holding the doorknob. I needed to go. This was my only chance to leave the palace. I couldn't pass it up. I left my breath light, stood on my tiptoes, and pushed hard against the door. Luckily, the door opened. I didn't waste time and sneaked into the room, closing the door behind me. When my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I found my intuition was right. Simon wasn't here. I didn't care about where he went. I just searched for the things I wanted in the room. The room was large, however, compared to the other rooms of the palace. There was not much furniture. I searched every corner of the room and didn't find anything special. But how was it possible? Why couldn't I find any private information about Simon in the place he lived? It was like he had appeared out of thin air. William's words rang in my ears. I know nothing about him. He is a mystery, and he never reveals his past to anyone. At first, I thought William was exaggerating, but now I knew it was true. Simon seemed to erase his presence in everyone. No one knew where he came from, his joys and anger, or his purpose. Was it possible that there was a person in the world who was lonelier than me? The thought struck me at this moment. My eyes fell on the desk. It had a drawer which was dragged out halfway. It seemed that Simon left the room in a hurry and the drawer was not pushed back. I walked toward the desk and pulled out the drawer completely. Inside was a wallet. Without a second thought, I opened it and a photo of a beautiful woman appeared. She looked young. She had long blonde hair and a gentle smile. Her blue eyes were like calm lake water, and her gentle gaze was peaceful. She sat on the bench with her back to the sun, her eyes looking at the camera as if shining. She had an undeniable beauty, although this beauty was not a shock. It was impressive. In a way, she made me feel a little familiar, even though I had never seen her before. It seemed that this was a grassy field in front of the pack house, and she was looking at the people who came out with her eyes full of tender love. I took out the photo from the wallet to see if there's any mark on the back. At the same time, a large pile of banknotes fell out of the wallet. Shit. I bent down to collect them from the floor. When I picked up one of them, I found it didn't belong to any kind of bank I knew. A dazzling light leaked through the gap in the curtain and landed on the front of the banked note. I read the words carefully, $50, the United States of America. As far as I knew, the United States was on the other side of the sea, but that's too far. An idea burst into my head at lightning speed. I looked at the photo and the banknote, and a smile formed. Simon's handle. I found it. I breathed a sigh of relief and stood up. Suddenly, a huge force lifted me, and I was pressed against the wall behind me. The hand holding my neck was so strong that I almost thought my neck bone was going to break. Simon's face came into view. He was furious. His light brown eyes looked like a fire burning, and the green tendons at the corners of his forehead throbbed. His handsome face was a little hideous, but it revealed a hint of wild beauty. I had just caught a glimpse of his face when my vision began to blur. His cold words broke into my ears like a warning of death. Who allowed you to touch my thing? The pressure on my throat was increasing and my sight was diminishing. Was this it? Was I dying? Chapter 5, Training begin. Alice's paw, everything was going black. I grabbed at Simon's hand, which was still wrapped tightly around my thin neck in a final attempt to save myself. Maybe I shouldn't stop him. Then that familiar sharp pain shot through my hands, and I felt the wolf claws emerge. Simon's hand released, and I gasped. Air flooded my lungs, easing my lightheadedness. My vision started to come back as well, and I blinked as I saw Simon's hand covered in blood. My claws had sliced into him. Simon stood there, staring at his hand in shock. In disgust, I started the repeated process of grabbing the claws and painfully ripping them out. But the pain was almost a comfort at this point, a punishment for having this nasty wolf blood taint my body. Just as before, my hands slowly returned to normal. They turned back into fingers. Little by little, they slowly healed, but the blood still covered my hands while my breathing started to get back under control. Simon still stood there watching me carefully the entire time. I wondered what he was thinking as I watched his eyes stare at me in new consideration. The wild fire that had been in them mere minutes ago was slowly ebbing. My mutation was not something I was proud of, and therefore not many people knew of it. Now, this man of unknown origins knew my secret, but I knew his too. You come from another continent, I said, trying to break the silence. But Simon must have had the same idea. What do you, he asked at the same time? We both stared at each other, debating who should talk. I started to think, how could I work this out to my advantage and get him to finally agree to teach me? I will tell the Alpha King that you are from the United States, I said quickly before he could ask any more questions about me. I will tell everyone. At the mention of me touching his things, his eyes darkened again, and I watched as he clenched his fist. Although his hand was healed, he still stood a couple of feet away from me. He took one step closer, and I naturally took one away. Unless you agree to teach me, I continued, causing him to pause. I watched as he stood there and had an internal battle with himself. On one hand, he was livid at the idea that I had found out his secret and that I had touched his stuff. But on the other hand, I watched as he continued to look down at my body. For probably the first time in my life, I noticed that it wasn't in lust, but it was in curiosity. He was obviously still wondering what my mutation meant. I could use that to my advantage as well. I can tell you about me if you teach me also, I told him. He raised an eyebrow at me, and I knew that I had piqued his interest. I might not be able to use my acting ways to get away with stuff around him, but at least I could still read his expression. Well, some of them. He looked me up and down once more. For the first time, I found myself disappointed at the lack of sexual interest he was showing. Was he immune to my beauty? I had never met anyone that was Fine, Simon finally said, sharply interrupting my thought. Okay, fine, as in yes, I asked for clarification. He turned away from me and walked over to the desk. Yes, he kept his back to me. We will start tonight when there will be fewer eyes. That's fine by me, I said in a relieved tone. I hated everyone here. Anyway, everyone except Joan, of course. Maybe if I trained and got strong enough, I could finally leave this palace forever and take Joan with me. Simon finally turned back around to face me and looked confused at why I was still there. You may leave now. Dismissed. I thought about saying something snarky back to him, but since I had already gotten my win, I decided not to push my luck. With one last look at this odd, handsome man, I turned and walked out of his door. The rest of the day went by in a blur. For the first time in a long time, I actually had something to look forward to, so I pushed through all of my maid chores for the day in a much better mood than normal. It also helped that most of the guests were still gone as well. There were fewer people to care for and fewer people to annoy me. The halt in training would also make it easier for Simon to train me. So James being ill was really the most beneficial thing. I secretly plotted ways that I could keep him sick and keep the other awful beings away. Too bad I didn't have access to poison. As soon as the sun set, I headed to my small room and changed out of my maid's dress and into something that might be more suitable for training. I wasn't sure what Simon did in his lessons, but I was sure that a dress would not be effective. Feeling restless, I hurried back over to Simon's separate living area, making sure to duck behind a wall or hide when I saw anybody else around. After years of taking their abuse, I had become pretty efficient at evading them. However, the great thing about where Simon was staying was that we would have no interruptions. There was nobody else staying in that section, and he had made it very clear to the staff that he liked to be left alone. By the time I showed up, he was already standing by his door, waiting for me. Come with me, his calculated voice said. I wondered to myself if he ever showed emotion. The glimpse of his rage earlier was the only time I had seen behind this calm exterior, and it made me curious as to what truly lies beneath. Simon turned to walk away, and I followed. I stared at him as we walked. He was still wearing a nice full black suit that complemented his tall, slender body perfectly, and his hair was as neatly slicked back as every other time I had seen it. This instantly pissed me off. The way that he was dressed showed me that he was not going to be involved with training me, at least for tonight. And even though I had to admit that he looked good, I didn't want him to just use words to teach me. I needed to remind myself that Simon was the most respected and sought after teacher in the wolf packs. Maybe he knew better than me. Simon continued to walk silently, and I followed behind, trying to match the pace of his long leg. As a maid, I was used to physical labor, but it wasn't like I walked constantly. Not paying attention, I bumped into Simon as he came to a stop. He reached out and caught my hand as I lost my balance, keeping me upright. As soon as I was all right, though, he instantly dropped it. I looked up at him, but he was looking away. This was new for me. I thought he might have been playing about not falling for my act, but now I could see he wasn't. He didn't look at me like any other wolf ever had. He looked at the real me. It pissed me off again. I looked around and saw that he had led me to the small lake that was in this section of the property. It wasn't as large as the other lake, but it was still a fairly good size and deep. For a moment, I wondered if he planned to do to me what I had done to James. My heart skipped and my neck throbbed where it was still tender from this morning. However, Simon looked down at me, and I didn't see any emotion in his calm, soothing eyes. I stared back into them, watching as the moonlight bounced off of the lake and reflected in his eyes. Start running, Simon said, breaking me from my thoughts once more. Wait, what? I asked as I looked around. Simon sighed, seemingly annoyed with having to explain himself. I felt my anger spark again. It was one thing to know that he thought I was weak, I didn't need him thinking that I was stupid too. Run laps around the lake. He continued to look at me. Why, I asked, watching as his jaw clenched slightly. First he started, and I sadly noticed that he was speaking in his normal voice. I liked getting a rise out of him first. I am the teacher. You do not question me. I bit my tongue. Yeah, that would be hard for me. Second, he continued, just this once I will explain, fighting requires endurance. You are weak. You don't have any. We must fix this. You did not just call me weak again. My blood was boiling and my voice came out in a near growl. I'll show you weak. My rage got the best of me and I swung out my foot, aiming between his legs. Without so much as a flinch, Simon batted my foot away like a fly, even more irritated. I whipped around, aiming for a spinning kick straight to his kidney. This time, he grabbed my leg and hoisted it up, causing me to lose my balance and fall back. He took advantage of my imbalance to quickly pin me to the ground. His body pressed against mine and his face was mere inches away. I could feel his breath wash over me as his eyes stayed indifferent. You aren't ready for this, he said in a low, husky voice. Maybe I am, I thought as his muscles pressed me even harder into the earth. With a quick mental slap, I shook my head. What on earth was with me today? I never had this sort of reaction with any man in my entire life. They usually wanted me. I usually didn't want them. Simon seemed to think that I had understood his point because he stood up off of me and gave me space to get myself up. Run, he repeated and turned his back to walk away. Deciding I should blow off some steam anyway, I began to jog around the lake. As I ran, I watched as Simon walked over to a nearby tree, bent down for a few minutes, and then proceeded to climb up it and sit on the lower branch. The fact that he had just managed to climb up a tree with a full suit on had me impressed. That feeling didn't last long, though, as something hard ricketed off of my right shoulder. Oh, I couldn't help but react. What was that? I'm testing your reflexes. I heard Simon's voice drift down from the tree as I passed it. Another small pebble came flying through the air, and I tried and failed to avoid it. It bounced squarely off my thigh. I only winced this time. The pain was nothing compared to what I usually felt, but I also just didn't want to show Simon any other things that he might deem as weak, so I continued to run and held back the cries each time a pebble struck me. I didn't escape a single one. I couldn't tell if my reflexes were really that awful or if Simon just had extremely good aim. I would have to have him teach me that next. The rest of the week followed the same training style, though. I would meet Simon every night after dark. We would go to the lake. I would run. He would hit me with rocks, and I wouldn't say a word. On the third night, however, when we were reaching quitting time, I watched as Simon wound up his hand more than normal. He was throwing this one harder than any before, I could already tell. I continued to run, watching his movements closely. Just as he released, I jumped up, determined to evade at least one rock he threw. I felt confident. The rock smashed into my raised leg right on the ankle bone, and I heard a crack of bone, sending me flying to the ground. I tried to stand back up, but my ankle gave way beneath me. I panted in pain, still set on not showing any weakness. Simon walked up, unconcerned, and examined my ankle. It's broken, he stated the obvious. I just nodded, worried that I would give away the pain I was in if I opened my mouth. As long as I didn't stand on it, then I was fine. But how was I supposed to get back to my room? Suddenly, without forewarning, Simon slid his hands around my back and under my legs and picked me up bridal style. My arms instinctively hooked around his neck, ensuring that I wouldn't fall or that he wouldn't drop me. My ankle throbbed in pain as it hung, but I was more focused on Simon. What are you doing? I asked incredulously. You won't make it back to your room like this, and I don't want you staying here all night, man. He had a way with words. I thought sarcastically.
Oh, all right. I responded, wondering if I should be offended that he didn't want me to spend the night, but shaking it off.
He got me back to my room and into my bed before silently slipping back out without a word. I laid in bed, thinking about how I was going to hide my ankle from Joan in the morning and how I was going to be able to work on it all day. And as I lay there, I thought about how it had felt to have my arms wrapped around Simon. No, I wouldn't even dare to go there. I was not some maiden. I was a survivor, and he was just another device to help me get free. Suddenly, I heard a knock on my door, jolting me from my thoughts. Before I could answer, Simon's voice rang out. Can I come in? His voice was deep and clear. I blinked, remembering what I was thinking about mere minutes before, and a wave of heat rushed up to my cheek. I'm asleep, I replied in a panic, and I immediately regretted it. How could I reply to him when I'm asleep? Without waiting for me to say more, he opened the door and walked in. Great, it was still unlocked. The first training session was so exhausting that I let my guard down and not only let Simon into my room, but also almost fell asleep without checking the door. What you doing back here? I asked, sounding somewhat accusatory. He ignored my question. How do you feel? His gaze was focused on me. I crossed my hands and hugged my quilt automatically out of nervousness. It was like I had no control over my movements. It was almost subconscious. I thought back to Simon's embrace, and then it dawned on me how I must have been presenting. Hell no, I can't let Simon find out I'm unconsciously fantasizing about him. I quickly flicked my hands away, hiding them under the quilt, clutching at the sheets. Fine, I replied curtly. Fine. He pouted as he walked to the bedside and rechecked me with his eye. My face burned, but I tried to hide it, so I questioned him as a counterattack. I thought you left. I looked at him and found he was still in his suit. There was no need for him to return, unless maybe I'd changed his mind about me. I eyed him, waiting for the inevitable confession of lust when he reached into his pocket. Hold your hand out, he ordered. What? I subconsciously asked. I said, give me your hand, he repeated. My room was so dark that I could barely see the outline of his body. I wiped the sweat from my hands on the sheets and hesitantly reached out. A cold item landed in the palm of my hand. I closed it and found that it was a small porcelain bottle. This is the last lesson I will teach you today. Take it, or I may reconsider whether accept you as my student. Simon pulled out the chair in front of the desk and sat down. What you can't, I retorted, but he interrupted. Ellis, why do you want me to teach you? He asked. I could feel his gaze land on me, even though I couldn't see him because I needed to leave. I hated my life here, and I hated shifters even more. I bit my lip, stopping myself from speaking my true thoughts. The less he knew, the better. You said I was weak, and I don't want to be weak forever. I'm longing to be better. I may not be as strong as you, but I want to protect myself and the people I care about. I took a deep breath after confessing. He was silent for a long time. Had he left? Just when I was sure I was alone. He answered, I get it. Going forward, don't repeat what you did today. He continued before I could ask. I understand that you think you need to prove yourself, but you need to be smart. I can't train you if you are hurt. Disobedient students are instantly terminated with me. Do you understand? I widened my eyes and was stunned. I couldn't help but nod. Don't be so anxious to prove yourself, and you won't get hurt. Believe it or not, that's not what I want to see. In the bottle is a potion that should aid in rapid healing and get your ankle to heal faster than you would normally. I hope you won't let me down tomorrow." And with that, he stood up and left my room. My mind was completely disturbed by his words. I clenched the small bottle in my hand, and it was already warm to the temperature of my palm. Its hard exterior pressed against my skin, but I didn't feel cold anymore. Despite all of this, I had countless questions in my head, flying around. He wasn't scolding me or threatening me, and he still wanted to be my teacher. Why was it possible he actually cared for me? No one cared for me, no one except Joan. I took the potion Simon gave me and laid back down. It wasn't long after my head hit the pillow that I fell fast asleep. Chapter 6, To Train or Not to Train. This is published. I woke up the next day and was surprised that my ankle was no longer sore. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I finally moved my way forward to stand and put weight on the foot. It didn't hurt at all. I tentatively walked a few steps and it worked well. My ankle was almost entirely healed. It was unbelievable, but it was true. There was always one good thing about the nasty blood that flowed through me, the rapid healing process. It had definitely come in handy over the years of punishment that should have left me dead. However, never before had I been able to heal so quickly. I was still worried about how I was going to work with injuries today, but now I didn't have to worry. My purpose was to be able to defeat the palace guards and leave the palace. I didn't care how to fight the abnormal rogues who lurked outside of the walls. I just want to leave. But in order to get there, I needed to lie to Simon about why I wanted to fight, why I needed to fight. And I think that I had him almost convinced in the following days. Even though I was getting sick of just doing laps, I couldn't escape more laps and dodging training. Simon didn't let me go, and it seemed he didn't want to see me hurt either. The sun began to rise as the next day was finally approaching. I tossed on my apron and tied it around my waist when Joan stopped me. "The Alpha King asked me to run out on a few errands, so I will be gone." Most of the rest of the morning, she hesitated. "That means that you will have to take breakfast to James again. I won't be able to." I couldn't help but groan. "How about I don't? And he can just starve to death." Alice Joan exclaimed in a forced whisper and hurried to glance around her. "Watch your mouth around here. You never know who is listening." Not sure if I could bite back the rest of the rude things that wanted to come spilling out. I simply nodded and kept my mouth tightly shut. Joan seemed to realize I was struggling and came up to give me one of her warm hugs. "I am sorry," she whispered to me. "I will be back as soon as I can." I nodded again and then watched as she walked out the door. Set on the idea of finishing my worst tasks. First, I left the room and headed to the kitchen. After grabbing the tray of food, I walked through the giant palace until I made it to James's room. The only positive thing this morning was that it was still early, so there weren't many others around to notice it or to harass me. I could get my work done much faster without the abuse or the male attention. As soon as I reached the room, I walked inside. No need to delay the inevitable. Let's get it done. "Well, look who we have today." James began as soon as he saw me. I noticed that William was here with him again today, but I tried to avoid looking at either of them. Overhearing them the other day had put me at ease as far as being worried about the punishment I would receive upon everyone learning of my involvement in James's illness. But that didn't mean I was at ease. James stood up out of his bed and strode over to me. Even though I wasn't looking at him, I had gotten very good at observing through my peripheral vision. Call it a maid perk. He was dressed lazily in a pair of sweats and a sweaty shirt that looked like he had been wearing it for days. I suddenly found myself admiring Simon for his style and his fresh, clean suits. James grabbed my attention, though, by grabbing my wrist. Talk to me when I am talking to you, he said clearly. Like Olivia, he always had a stronger sense of confidence when he was surrounded by people watching him. I looked up at him finally to see his eyes full of humor as he stared at me. His eyes were also slightly glossy, and I could smell him as he got closer. Somebody was back to their old drinking ways. Were you talking to me? I asked in my fakely sweet voice. He stepped closer, and I naturally tried to move away, but his grip on my wrist was firm. I lost my balance for a moment, which James seemed to think was funny. Oh no, my weak, pathetic excuse for a sister must not feel well today. He faked concern in his voice. Better be careful. Don't want to drop it. And with the final word, he tugged down hard on the wrist he was grabbing, and the tray flew out of my hands. I heard the sounds of shattering dishes and James's laughter. My first emotion was rage, just as it always was when I was being abused. But I quickly covered it up by dropping to my knees. I worked up my fake tears impressively fast and was sobbing as I picked up the pieces of the broken dishes among the spilled food and put them in my hand. I squeezed at one point, letting the pain control me and prevent a shift. I noticed William still sitting in the chair by the bed, looking at me with pity. I was putting on my best act yet, which was definitely working, especially on William. What is wrong with you, man? William asked James loudly. Look what you've done. He walked over and grabbed James's arm and pulled him back from me. I took the opportunity to run out of the room, still crying and acting sad. My limp actually aided in my portrayal. Alice, wait, I heard William yell. Then I heard the two boys following behind me and slowly let a few pieces of porcelain fall to the ground. As I backed up, William came into view first. Please don't go, you're my mate, he said as he appeared. I actually stopped walking. Well, that was new. She's your what? James yelled as he came into view. No way, dude, she's not even a wolf. Wow, not a real one. Anyway, I watched as James stepped on one of the pieces of broken porcelain, causing a small amount of blood to spurt. But he did not react. Either he was too drunk or too shocked at the idea of his friend announcing that I was his mate, which I had to admit was a little preposterous. I stared at him like I actually looked at him and felt nothing. She's the daughter of the Alpha King. I would be proud to accept her as my mate. William continued. I don't feel anything, though, I admitted, annoyed at the fact that they were still talking about me instead of at me, as if this had nothing to do with me. See, her wolf is so flawed, she can't even tell if she has a mate or not, James said, turning to William, and my father has never acknowledged her as his, because of how weak she is. If that was the reason he hadn't acknowledged me, then there was no reason James or Olivia should get recognition. Worthless, disgusting wolves. Even with the full strength of the wolf blood, they were weak. Maybe she is a late bloomer. William tried to defend me. What if she could get stronger? I could make her stronger. They continued to quarrel with each other and didn't even glance at me. More and more people were attracted to them and looked at me with unbelievable expression. Yeah, quite unbelievable. How could an alpha like William sense that I was his mate? I didn't even have a wolf. It had to be a trick to try to get with me. It had to be, I would never be able to experience the bond. I felt several malicious glances from the crowd fall on me, and they were from those mated male shifters. Compared to the younger male shifters who filled the palace halls only days ago, their gaze was more obscure. They didn't want their mates to find out they were looking at me. James and William quarreled loudly, and more people began to crowd around. I didn't want to be in the spotlight, so I took it as my chance to slip away. As soon as I rounded the hallway, I found Simon standing there, staring at the scene that had unfolded. The tears leaking from my eyes stopped. I paused for a moment, but then continued in an attempt to walk past him. Our training sessions were still a secret, so nobody should know that we had any sort of relationship. I was just beside Simon when he reached out and grabbed my hand. He opened my fist to reveal the bloody, broken pieces of porcelain that were cutting into my hand, and then looked behind me at the trail of them. The pieces just sat there waiting for someone to make the mistake of stepping on them. Simon shook his head. What is the point of that, Shifter? Skin is too thick to be seriously affected by this. And, it will heal almost immediately. That is simply for petty revenge, and I will not stand for it. Simon's voice was serious. As always, when he discussed training, none of my students will conduct themselves in this manner. Understood. My means are more than that, I retorted. I don't believe it. He raised an eyebrow at me. His brown eyes looked deep in the dim light of the corridor. He seemed to be angry and mocking me. So how else do you think I should conduct myself? Yeah, I should beg them for mercy, satisfy their desires, fight with them. All of those methods I have tried. They don't work for you, powerful shifters. Bullying the weak doesn't need a reason. I couldn't help yielding to him. I thought I wouldn't say them to anyone, but they poured out of my chest uncontrollably with anger. I couldn't stop, and I didn't want to. Where were you when I was being bullied, huh? Yeah, I continued. How do you think I should protect myself? If I'm not ruthless, I can't survive, especially in a place where everyone is stronger than me. You are a powerful shifter, and you never have to humiliate yourself for survival. But I have to pretend to cry, pretend to laugh, and even hurt myself just so that I can survive. I wasn't quitting. It just poured out of me, all the anger, bitterness, rage. It was spilling out, and I wasn't stopping it. You say I'm your student. I shouldn't conduct myself in this way. So what did you teach me? You just keep me running laps next time. Will I run faster to escape the bullying? The roof of the hallway obscured the upper half of his face. I saw his beautiful lips move as if he wanted to say something, but he said nothing. After I took a breath, I realized what I had done, what I had said. I needed to really learn how to bite my tongue. What if he gets angry? What if he doesn't want to teach me anymore? The wind blowing into the hallway calmed me down. My mind was buzzing, and I clenched my fists nervously. Simon paused for a moment, but then brushed off my hands, freeing the remaining pieces of dishes. Can't you feel the pain? He asked as he worked. I forget I said, which technically wasn't a lie. When I'm emotionally stressed, I really can't take care of the physical pain, especially with Simon. I seem to be surprisingly unable to control myself. I couldn't let this happen again. It's dangerous to me. He bent down to examine my hand to see if he got it all. His warm breath swept over my hand, tickling my palm. My eyelashes fluttered like a frightened butterfly. I didn't dare to look at him. Alice, remember what I said on the first night? He asked. He finally let go of my hand and stood. My palms were wet, and the temperature of his breath remained. I take teaching seriously, he stated. Simply, I am the teacher. You should trust me. And he pouted and continued. If you can't, we can stop training tonight. He paused for a long time before uttering the last word. But when he spoke the last word to me, it sounded entirely muddled. My mind was focused entirely on what he had said before. We can stop training, Kev. He was giving up on me. My body froze and my ears buzzed. He was just like everyone else. So don't be so rash and think of your decisions or the consequences that are a direct result, he continued. I wanted to scream, to yell, but I simply nodded. This was it. Our training was over. Maybe he was already disappointed in me. Truthfully, I was a little disappointed in myself too. My only ticket out of here was gone. Deeper despair crept into my heart. I bit my lip, trying to say something to keep him there longer. Apologize anything. But I opened my mouth, and nothing came out. The outburst just now used all my strength. And I didn't know what to say to make him change his mind. He's not someone I could mess with, especially after he had seen my true self so many times. I didn't move, and his voice made its way to my ears as he spoke. Okay, then I must leave. I have other things to attend to. I looked up to see that Simon was already gone and wondered where he had gone. James and William's voices still echoed through the halls, but I couldn't tell what they were saying. If it was still about me, then I wished that they would go back into James' room or somewhere a little more secluded. But if there was anything I had learned in my life, it was that none of my wishes come true. Chapter 7, Simon's Poppy Store. I walked around the corner of the hall away from Alice and toward the two boys that were arguing, and that's what they were, boys. James and William stood relatively close to each other, but I wasn't worried about it turning into a physical fight as of yet. William was more soft-hearted and didn't turn to violence at every opportunity, and James was just simply drunk. I could already tell. You are crazy. How can Alice be your mate? James was practically yelling at William. I could hear the echo of his voice reverberating off the walls. Does your wolf really sense that Alice is your mate? William now stood in silence. She's seducing you. James continued to yell. Trust me, dude, I get it. She is a gorgeous girl. But she is smarter than she looks. I'm not saying that you shouldn't play with her a bit and get what you want, but I am just saying I don't want you to be used by her. She's a bitch, but I've heard she's great in the sack. That's your sister William finally cut in with what sounded like disgust. So what, the Alpha King never acknowledged her as his daughter? James shrugged. That makes her inferior even to those weak humans, and everyone treats her as such. I don't see what is wrong with using her as we see fit. It is by our grace that she even still lives. I didn't want to care about what they were saying. I never cared usually, but for some reason, it ticked me off more than I cared to admit. The words that came out of James's mouth were too harsh. And I cleared my throat, making myself known to interrupt their bashing of Alice. Both men looked at me, and I saw James' face switch to irritation. Hello, gentlemen. I assume that since you two are standing around gossiping that you've already finished your training exercises for the day. Oh, Mr. Simon, no, we were just on our way. William quickly answered James. On the other hand, continued to look at me in open disgust. Not like I can do much still since you put me on restrictions. James snapped. Well, you seem to be feeling just fine today, I said as I looked him up from head to toe. I have some free time right now. Why don't I assist you in your exercises? Follow me. And they both looked like they really didn't want to, but they knew better than to stand up to me. I turned and walked out to the courtyard where we had been conducting training for the past couple of weeks. William and James followed behind me. Once I came to a stop, they instantly attacked me. I had been training them both for long enough now that they knew that I didn't like to waste time. A smile crossed my face as they charged me. I was excited to put them in their place. Within seconds, both boys lay on the ground, groaning in pain. I still hadn't even had to transform. These shifters needed more help than I had anticipated. I brushed my hands off against each other, not wanting to dirty my suit, and gestured for two of the guards that surrounded me to approach. The guards took one look at them on the ground and knew what I needed. They each picked up one boy and threw them over their shoulders, then headed into the building, taking them to their respective rooms. For the first time, I had enjoyed hurting them and therefore enjoyed watching them being carried away. I specifically kept an eye on William. He had claimed that Alice was his mate, and I had to admit that my curiosity was piqued. Was he lying? I pulled down the sleeves of my suit to make sure it still looked presentable and turned to walk out of the large gates. William's father, Alpha Alex of the Opal Moon Pack, had invited me to come to his territory at the time. I had told him I was too busy, but now I had a reason to go. It wasn't far to the Opal Moon Pack from the Alpha King's palace, and I made it there without any interruption. I began to walk up to the large building and was warmly greeted by Alex. Within minutes, he inquired about his son's progress. Has he improved much since I saw you last at the banquet? Alex asked. I am sure you heard about what happened to Prince James, I began. That has put a halt on most of the training session. However, I did personally train with him this morning, and he does seem to be learning my training style. I am sure he will excel soon. Good. That's good to hear, Alex said, seemingly relieved. There was an interesting development this morning, though. I wondered how much information I would be able to pull from him. Oh, really? What happened? William declared that he has found his mate. His mate? How is that possible? Alex looked genuinely shocked. We threw him a ball on his 18th birthday to try and find him his mate and invited every shifter in the surrounding area. He didn't find her then. How did he find her now? Who is it? Who is William's mate? It is Alice, the eldest daughter of the Alpha King. I watched as his face changed as I told him who it was. You're joking, he said in disbelief. No, why? What was it with these shifters and Alice? I watched that girl grow up. She doesn't even have a wolf at this. His eyes dodged around, telling me that he had more information that he wasn't willing to give up. I'll have to speak with William about this. I simply nodded. I didn't want to press the issue and raise suspicion, though. The more I learned about Alice, the more curious I became. After a small meal and more training conversation, I got up to leave, excusing myself from the table. Alex didn't need to ask where I was headed. He already knew. The graveyard looked the same as the last time I had been there, so I walked over to the familiar gravestone, carrying the flowers I had picked in my hands. I stood silently as I looked over the name Maria carved into the stone. May was a young girl that I had found lost in the forest last year. Her childlike playfulness and innocence instantly reminded me of my nephew, and I found myself drawn to her. When I was around her, the loneliness didn't feel as strong. We had bonded over me returning her to her parents at the Opal Moon Pack, and I had stuck around ever since. The more time I spent with the kind girl, the more she became like family. Then when I was away with another pack, the abnormal rogues attacked the Opal Moon Pack, and Mates was killed. By the time I had heard the news and rushed back, it was too late. It had felt like losing my family all over again. I stared over her burial, placing one small white flower on top of it. As I stared at her headstone, I was reminded of times gone by. Flashback. I heard a small noise coming from the windowsill and curiously made my way over to it. As I expected, it was May. She climbed up my windowsill and carefully placed a small bouquet of white flowers on it. Even though my room was on the first floor, the windowsill was a bit high for her short body. She needed to stand on tiptoe and use her chubby little hands to pick up the windowsill to get there. Although it wasn't the first time she had done this, I frowned and pretended to be angry at her. You shouldn't do this. It's too dangerous, May. I criticized her. Sorry, Mr. Simon. I just want to give you the flowers. She blinked and looked at me mischievously. You can knock on the door and enter, I answered. I looked at the flowers in her hand. They were beautiful and carried the morning dew. It looked like she had just plucked them from the garden. Her little hand could barely hold them, but she clung tightly, afraid they would fall. Beads of sweat hung from the tip of her small nose, and short hair stuck to her face. In the sun, her little red face was like an apple. She smiled brightly at me, and my heart seemed to transform into something warm and soft. But I want to give you a surprise, she frowned. However, I seem to have failed again. Mr. Simon, your hearing is too sensitive. Can't you pretend you didn't hear me? She supported her upper body with her arms, trying to climb into the room, her calves dangling in the air. Give me your hand, and I'll pull you in. As my hand passed under her armpit and carried her in from outside the window, she giggled and wrapped her arms around my neck. She still held the bouquet in her hand. The scent of flowers and the smell of milk from her body surrounded me. She was covered in dirt and dust from the garden, which must have stained my suit. But now was not the time to think about that. Why do you want to give me a surprise? I asked. Because I want to make you happy. She replied in her lovely voice, thank you, but I'm happy. You don't need to give me flowers to cheer me up every day. I was trying to get her to give up the innocent act. I knew her better than that. She raised an eyebrow. You adults are always dishonest. May looked at me with a bulging little face, her big eyes flickering and full of disapproval. And I was struck by her sharpness at 5 years old. She had quite an acute sense of awareness. The truth was, I wasn't unhappy. I just didn't remember the last time I laughed. There were no people or things that could affect my emotions in any capacity, and I was too far away from my hometown to even think of returning. Not that I'd ever want to. Her chubby body wriggled in my arms. Finally, she found a suitable position. She whispered in my ear in her soft, sweet voice, one day, someone other than me will make you laugh again. I just know it. You're a good person, Mr. Simon. But until then, I'll make you happy in the best way I know how. Her lovely words echoed in my ears and couldn't help the smile that crossed my face. For a shifter cub, she showed a talent for language beyond her age. And as for her saying, I'm a good person, I laughed self-deprecatingly in my heart. If she had seen me before, she wouldn't have said that so freely. Flashback in. As I stared into her carvings etched on the stone, I decided right then and there to devote my time to discovering the source behind the wild rogues and hopefully eliminate them. I worked on teaching the shifters in the area how to protect themselves against these rabid beasts and hoped I could somehow prevent anything like May's death from happening again. Until May, I hadn't really cared about what these rogues had done to the world. My world had already been broken. But she reminded me what it was to care about someone, to care about something, and I would respect her memory by protecting and preparing others. I stared at the grave again. I hadn't returned to the Opal Moon Pack in quite a while. The source of the rogues still eluded me, and I didn't want to admit this to May or her family. However, standing at the grave didn't bring me the guilt I expected. Instead, I felt more determined. I was reminded of my promise and reminded of my reasoning. I set the flowers softly on the earth with a sad smile. Hey, May, I whispered, how is heaven? I felt a cool breeze touch my cheek and a soft smile formed on my lips as I let it take over me. I missed her more than she'd ever known. On the way out of the graveyard, I noticed May's parents and quickly ducked behind a tree. Even from this distance, I could see that her mother was pregnant again. She smiled at her husband, and they looked genuinely happy again since May's passing. I didn't want to ruin that for them, so instead of disturbing them, I turned around. When I started to leave, my phone rang. Not many people called me, so it took me a second to find it. Most of the time, I even forgot I had one. When I finally found it, I saw the picture for Alan's contact on the screen. I had forgotten he was supposed to call with more information about the abnormal rogue. Alan, I answered quietly. I did not agree to stop the training. I heard Alice's voice scream through the phone. I looked at May's parents to see them staring at me now. I'm at the normal place waiting for you.
Then she huffed and hung up. I looked up and saw Meg's parents approaching me. They looked surprised to see me, but their faces were as warm as always.
Simon May's dad said in greeting, "It's good to see you. Are you here to visit May?" Her mom asked. I simply nodded. I never did well with others. May has been giving us dreams lately. She says she has a new home and is happy. Her dad said as he grabbed his wife's hand in comfort. And I am with child. Again, May's mother beamed. We are happy. I'm glad, I said with a smile. I really was. Grief was not something I wished upon anyone. We're glad you are here. We wanted to ask if you would like to be our child's godfather. I looked at them in surprise. Godfather. Yes, the mother exclaimed, though. We understand if you cannot do it based on that phone call. It sounds like you have somebody waiting for you at home, too. It makes me happy to hear that you have your own family. Little May would be so happy for you. I was going to correct her and explain that Alice was just a student, but at her last words, I couldn't help but bite my tongue. The relief in their eyes that I was not alone was too much, and I didn't want to disappoint them. I swallowed the truth. Yes, I said, instead, of course, I will be their godfather. I would be honored. May's mother beamed and hugged me tightly. She was so ecstatic. It made me feel good, even if just for a moment. All I knew was that this family didn't deserve any more reminders of the suffering they had faced. And if I was going to be a godfather to their newborn child, I needed to find answers to the rogue problem sooner rather than later. Chapter 8, Meeting Out Alice's Pup. What is this? I hear of William declaring you as his mate. Joan asked as she walked into the kitchen to find me doing the dishes from lunch. You already heard? I groaned. Didn't you just get back? So it's true. Joan looked flabbergasted. Yes, I just got back, and that is all the palace is talking about. That's not good. Yeah, it's true. I told her. He just blurted it out earlier. I got annoyed and walked away, though, so that's all I know. Really. Joan kept her eyes on me, but once she was satisfied that I had no interest in William, she sighed and asked me no more questions. This wasn't good. Olivia would be looking for me to torture me if she knew anything good had happened to me. There was no doubt in my mind that she'd already heard the news and she'd be furious, jealous, even. I needed to hide before she could find me. Then I thought of Simon. Maybe I could sneak over to his place and wait for him to return. I knew from the guards that he had left the palace and I wasn't sure where he went. What if he really had given up on me? I didn't want to stop training. I needed to be stronger. I didn't know what I planned on doing to get back into his good graces, but I needed him to resume our lessons. No matter the cost. I wonder, did I do something wrong? Why did I even care this much? This was Simon. We're talking about the Simon that most people around here were terrified of. His opinion of me shouldn't matter in the slightest. I sighed, making Joan look at me worriedly. Is there any way you could cover the rest of my duties for the day? I pleaded with Joan. If the palace is talking about William's announcement that much, I don't think I should be around. Of course, Joan said, then I saw her temper flare for a moment. If anybody gives you trouble, you let me know. Okay, will do. I wouldn't. I gave her a quick hug and sneaked out of the side kitchen door. Once again, I was lucky enough not to encounter anybody on the way to Simon's living quarters. Simon's door loomed before me, and I gave it a solid knock. No one answered. I already knew he wouldn't be there, but I couldn't help but think he might have returned early. Just as I was about to leave, I heard the door open and turned around anticipatory to see Simon. Maybe I was right after all. My face contorted when I saw it wasn't him. A tall man that looked to be about Simon's age was standing in the doorway, looking at me in surprise. The next thing I knew, he was violently grabbing my arm and ripping me into the room. As soon as he shut the door, his question started. "Who are you?" he asked in a grumpy and irritable voice. "What are you doing here?" Who was he? That's what I wanted to know. He seemed to have free access to Simon's room, which was intriguing to me. I didn't remember ever seeing him around the palace before either. Making a decision to try and get more information, I turned on my acting charm and smiled. Hopefully he wasn't immune to it, like Simon. "I am Simon's lover." It was the first idea that had come into my head. The man was still gripping my wrist, and I felt it tighten. I let out a small gasp, as it felt like it might break. "You are lying," he growled out. "I have been with Simon for 2 years, and I have never seen you before. Not even a picture. Nor has he ever mentioned a lover. I don't believe he would have anything of that sort with you." Okay, I said quickly as the pain and pressure in my wrist grew. "Simon is my teacher. He is teaching me how to fight. My name is Elwin." I knew that giving the man my name would humanize me and maybe make him release me. Sure enough, his hand let go of my wrist. However, he still looked suspicious as he stayed close to me. "Who are you, and how are you in the teacher's room?" I asked the man, "What are you here for?" He looked at me for a moment, and his expression turned to one of annoyance. "My name is Elwin," he announced. "I was supposed to make a report to Simon today, but Simon isn't here as he promised, so I am patiently waiting." Report of what I asked. He seemed to be pretty open. "Just normal stuff," he said vaguely, "mostly concerning the rogues in this area and the location of the abnormal rogues." "Why did you come here?" I noticed he was changing the subject, but it didn't bother me at the moment. That was still more information than I had ever gotten out of Simon. "We have been training every night, and he said that we might not train when I saw him earlier. So I was just trying to verify our session for tonight." I flipped my hair over my shoulder, hiding the fact that Simon had decided to end our teacher-student relationship. I wouldn't let that happen. Plus, there is some gossip going around the palace concerning me, so I was just trying to get away before it escalated. I was hoping that if I gave Alan this small piece of personal information, he would begin to trust me a little more. Building trust and getting people to talk was one of the hardest parts of my manipulation. "You saw him earlier?" Alan asked. "Did anything seem unusual when you saw him?" "He seemed normal to me," I shrugged, "just dressed in his normal suit and everything. Nothing out of the ordinary." He was annoyed by me, but I didn't want to tell him the entire truth. Maybe Alan could help me get Simon to change his mind. Alan sighed and took a seat. It was working. He was opening up. "Simon likes to take off places by himself. However, he is a punctual man, and he will not let others wait for him for too long, which is why I decided to wait for him here." I had to admit that although Simon was a powerful shifter, his etiquette was indeed much stronger than others, namely James and Olivia. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that he hadn't ever really even treated me with disrespect. He only ever got angry when I touched his belongings. My neck throbbed at the reminder of the incident. "Do you have his contact information?" I asked, pointing to the cell phone in his front pocket. "Yes, but I never call Simon unless it's an emergency." I scrunched my nose. Truthfully, I had never seen Simon use a phone, but why not use it if you have it? "Simon is a teacher in the palace, you know?" Alan paused. I knew he was hesitating, but ultimately decided on keeping his cards close. "It has nothing to do with you unless Simon permits it." I won't tell you about him. I was disappointed. It seemed that I couldn't get more information about Simon from him. His hand still held the phone, so I hurried and snatched it away. The burly man looked like he was going to grab it back from me, then seemed to think better of it. He most likely knew that I was going to call Simon with it, and he was tired of waiting for him to. Plus, he was probably wondering if I did have a close relationship with Simon, because if he misjudged it and hurt me, then he could still be in a lot of trouble. So he crossed his arms across his chest and watched me do my work. "It'll be your head," he said with a shrug. Not scared in the slightest, I opened up the contacts. Technically, Simon had hurt me on the first night, but just because I had moved incorrectly while trying to evade his pebble. If I hadn't jumped to try and dodge, it would have hit me in the thigh, where it wouldn't have caused any damage. Since the time he had choked me right here in this office, I don't think there was a single thing that he had done to hurt me intentionally. Even the ankle incident was a mistake. In fact, it was often quite the opposite. I could still feel his magic healing potion coursing through my body and making me feel better and not worse. But this morning, maybe he was just reminding me in his way to better protect myself, and I lost control of it. I attacked him with my words. It's unimaginable, but I did. I feared he would reject me outright if I didn't say something. I pressed his name on the phone and saw the dialing sign appear. My palms started to sweat, but I had no choice. I put the phone to my ear and listened as it rang and rang and rang. My heart was beating fast, as if I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and taking one more step would determine my fate. Finally, I heard it pick up, and his voice came through the line. Alan, his voice was quiet. I felt a tingle at hearing his voice, which annoyed me more than anything. I did not agree to stop the training. I nearly screamed at him to ensure that he got the message. "I'm at the normal place waiting for you." Then, with an annoyed huff, I hung up on him before he could snap something back at me. I didn't want to hear any words of refusal. I couldn't let Simon reject me. My chest was heaving, as if my heart was about to erupt. Well done. I didn't back down. As for whether Simon would come or not, was another story. Alan looked at me dumbfounded. I grabbed my secret phone out of my pocket and copied Simon's information to it, so that way I would have it for later. Then I handed the phone to Elwin, handing it back to him. "Are you actually Simon's lover?" Elwin asked as he grabbed the phone. What I looked at him in confusion. No, he really is just my teacher. What makes you ask that? I have never seen anyone talk to Simon like that. He shook his head. "You either have a death wish or you like him." I felt the heat flush into my cheeks. "Death wish, definitely." Elwin just left. "If you like him, you should know he has a photo in his wallet," Elwin stated. I was surprised Elwin knew the photo too. That picture was the reason I was almost killed by Simon. But I still didn't know what the woman in the photo had to do with him before this. I wasn't interested in it. But now I couldn't deny that my heart had skipped a beat. And of course I know that photo. I rubbed my neck subconsciously. Elwin looked at me as if he knew everything. "I think that beautiful woman is Simon's mate." Elwin's words made my hand freeze. I never thought about it. The whole mate thing, I was not interested in shifter bonds. But Simon was also a shifter, a powerful one, that he couldn't possibly be without a mate. He was not like me, forgotten by the moon goddess. "Where's his mate?" I asked. I wanted to hide my curiosity. I knew that as a student, it's normal to care about a teacher's mate. But truthfully, I didn't just have curiosity. Who knows, maybe dead, Elwin noted with a tinge of despair. His change in tone alerted me, and all I knew about the mate bond came to my mind. It is said that when the werewolf's mate dies, he will be greatly hurt and turn into a rogue. Is that right? I asked. You say this as if you are not a shifter, Ellen answered, giving me a strange look. Then he sighed. But yes, essentially. They turn rogue and lose their minds. My eyes widened. Does that mean Simon was formerly a rogue wolf? No, I don't think so. Simon is a great shifter. He's strong, and I don't think he would ever reach that level of despair. I'm talking about myself. I used to be a rogue wolf. Simon saved me from the brink of insanity. Honestly, Simon is my savior. Simon was a savior. I didn't ever picture him that way, and thinking about him potentially losing his mate hurt me more than I expected. Maybe Simon knew real pain too, and maybe we were more alike than I thought. Chapter 9. It's just a crush. Alice's paw. How did Simon save you? I asked, my curiosity piqued. I couldn't get the idea of Simon, the savior, out of my head. Alan simply shook his head, but right when I thought he might answer, the phone that was still in his hand began to ring. I saw Simon's name pop up on the screen. This is Alan. He quickly answered once he saw who it was. I was standing close enough that I could hear everything that Simon said as well. The meeting is canceled for today. His smooth voice came over the phone, making my stomach turn. I'm sorry. Alan, next time. I will tell you earlier. He seemed to be in a very quiet place, surrounded only by the rustle of leaves being blown by the wind. I couldn't hear any other sounds. What happened? Are you all right? Alan asked. You never cancel a meeting. I leaned in, wanting to hear what Simon was going to say, but instead of giving answers, he asked his own question. Is Alice with you? My heart skipped. Alan glanced at me, and I shook my head, begging him not to tell Simon I was there. I had already used up all of my courage in the previous call, and I wasn't ready to face him again yet. If he couldn't speak with me, he couldn't reject me as a student. I'd wait in our usual spot for him to come. Only then would he be able to tell me face to face. Before Alan could decide to tell him or not, a quieter voice could be heard on the call. Is the girl called Alice? The female voice asked. I was surprised. I figured that he would be alone, as Alan had suggested. My mouth opened uncontrollably, and I had to bite my lip to keep from saying anything. I wasn't jealous by any means. I was more astonished. Simon with a female. Not that it mattered, though. As soon as the lady's voice could be heard, I heard the beep signifying that the call was ended. Simon had hung up. Unsure of how I was feeling, I left Simon's room and made my way to the lake to wait for him there. Who had that woman been? I shook my head and banished the thought from my mind. It's none of my business. I just wanted to leave the palace. Alan had said I could stay in Simon's room, but I didn't really want to get in any more trouble than I already would be. I knew Simon didn't like me or anybody in his room. Alan seemed to be fine, but he had said they had known each other for a couple of years. Maybe that's what it took to get Simon to open up or relax time, though Alan had made it seem as if Simon still kept him at an arm's length as well. I was still very much intrigued by his relationship with this tall, burly Alan, who looked almost like his complete opposite. Was their relationship more professional or personal? I couldn't tell. And then there was the information that they were researching the rogues. Alan had said something nonchalantly about what he typically reported for Simon. I was smart, and I could read between the lines. It's one of the reasons that I was still standing. So Simon was interested in rogues, or more specifically, he seemed to be interested in the mutated rogues. I knew he had some experience with them because that was the whole reason that he was here. Simon was one of the only shifters to know how to battle the mutated rogues and survive. He had started training for it at the Opal Moon Pack over a year ago. But then he had become super popular and everyone wanted his training. I still wonder why he came to the palace. There should be other reasons besides the invitation of the Alpha King. I sighed as I looked at the beautiful sky. Except for when I was taken out of the palace by the Queen 10 years ago, I never had a chance to leave the palace again. I didn't know how Simon planned to deal with mutated rogues, but if he leapt, I didn't have any way to find him. I couldn't even solve the palace guards. The gates of the palace were open to everyone except me. Without Simon, I would have been stuck forever in this place of hell for me. So how could I possibly let Simon go? Whenever I learned more about Simon, I was always left with more questions than when I started. Instead of waiting for him in his room, I decided to wait by the lake. I had told him that I was in the normal training spot, so I assumed that's where he would look for me. I headed there and found a nice rock to lay on and soak up the sun. To just get to sit down and relax was unheard of for me, and I was going to take advantage of it. I tried, but I failed. Whenever I tried to empty myself, an anxious thought broke into my mind. Would Simon even come? I knew I played it off to him and Alan that I was positive he would. But now that I was alone, I wasn't so. I sighed. I did what I could. The rest wasn't up to me. The only thing I knew for sure was that if he didn't come today, I would keep calling him until he accepted me again. At least I got his phone number. I touched the phone in my pocket, and it made me feel things that I had thought I had once lost. I scribbled on the ground with a branch to kill time. When I realized what I was doing, there was already a sim on the wet dirt. His name was only a few strokes away. I looked at the word in disbelief before I could figure out what the hell possessed me to do this. I immediately stood up, reaching out on my foot to cover it before someone saw. As the sun began to sink, the familiar pains of my mutation began. I sat up as I could feel my ears burning and elongating. I reached up and felt the fur that was covering them with my fingers before my fingers began to bend and snap and turn into claws. The pain was familiar to me at this point, but that didn't mean I liked it. It was even worse because I hated the shifter part of me so much. A constant reminder that I would never be fully rid of these despicable creatures. The sun fell into the lake, dyeing the blue water of the lake a vivid red. My blood fell on the surface of the lake, rippling with layers and layers while the shift kept on going, destroying my skin and making it bleed. My half-human, half-wolf shadow was reflected on the surface of a messy lake, like a painter destroying a terrible painting. I angrily grabbed a claw, preparing to rip it out as usual, when all of a sudden, my elongated ears picked up a noise. I looked around me at the familiar sound and felt my stomach drop as I saw Olivia strolling angrily up to me. How had she found me out here? Had she been looking for me all day? Of course she was. I stood up to brace myself as she got closer. The rage in her eyes was familiar at this point in my life. Only she would still be searching for me. It almost made me smile to think of her wasting an entire day looking for me. Nobody said she was clever. Olivia had been crushing on William forever, and I could already tell before she even opened her mouth that she was going to let me have it. As much as I hated to admit it, there was one thing that the two of us had in common: our foul mouth. "Look who I finally found," she sneered out as she got close enough for me to hear her. The ugly bit. "How may I help you, Princess Olivia?" I couldn't help but greet her in my normal snarky tone. But instead of answering, she shoved me hard, making me stumble backward. It wasn't the first time she had used physical force on me, But for some reason, this was different. Her shove was vicious and vindictive. Like William's confession had brought her true nature out more, and I couldn't help but feel it was only going to get more violent. Don't fucking talk to me, you piece of garbage. I just needed to find you and remind you how completely worthless you are. I mean, look at you. And I knew she was referring to the mutations that I hadn't been able to get rid of yet. I put my claws together self-consciously, even though I knew I shouldn't let her get to me. She was just jealous. She forcefully grabbed my arm and squeezed it so hard that I swore I'd lose blood circulation. I winced in pain, which only made her smile and press even harder. What am I hurting you, you useless freak? Come on. Show me your claws. I'd love to see how fucked up you are when you turn. She spit in my face as she spoke and then slapped me. The burn from the impact was painful, and I winced at it. Her grin was sadistic, and her laughter was somehow even darker. I tried to control myself. I wouldn't allow the pain to force a change. I took a step back each time she advanced me. I glanced around at my surroundings, taking in anything that could be used for my benefit. The question wasn't if she would attack me, but when I noticed a decent-sized mud hole near the lake's edge and directed my body toward it. You don't even have a wolf, you just have these filthy mutations that are honestly just disturbing. You're a freak. William doesn't really want you, he just pities you. Everybody pities you because you're pathetic. She kept advancing, getting directly in my face each time. You are defective. And even if William really did believe you were his mate, there is no way you could complete the match. There is no wolf in you to accept the mate bond. I didn't contradict her. The fact was that she was right, though. I didn't want William anyway. I would never be a complete mate for anyone. Nor would I want to be a mate of these disgusting creatures. I still had dreams of being human, or at least pretending to be. I'm going to teach you a lesson in humility. She growled out, getting ready for another brutal attack. I quickly put my acting hat on. I agree with you, I said in my most downtrodden voice, causing her to pause, though only momentarily. I don't deserve William. He deserves a shifter as a mate, and that's not me. Plus, I might not have a mate, but I do like someone, just not William. I kept leading her, walking to the side as I talked closer and closer to the eroded hole. With the lake shore so close by, the water had seeped in, creating a mud hole of sorts. One she'd easily fall into. Olivia stumbled into another smaller hole while advancing me, but continued toward me regardless. She might have been both physically and mentally abusive, but one thing I was thankful for was that she wasn't clever in the slightest. You like someone? She asked, more shocked, then angry. Now her hand dropped. Who is it? Who do you like? I knew she only cared so she could make fun of me further and ruin my life more than it already was. So I thought of the only person that could possibly scare Olivia away from me, the only person that had tossed her and all of the other princes and princesses around like rag dolls. The only person that I think any of them were truly afraid of. I have a crush on Simon, and I watched in satisfaction as Olivia looked at me, stunned. And she even forgot to pay attention to her feet. What do you say? As she screamed and subconsciously stepped forward. Almost instantly, her feet caught in the mud hole, and she fell face first upon losing her balance.
I stopped cowering and stood up straight to admire my handiwork.
My mutated ears had allowed me to hear it, and I shot my eyes up, trying to find the source. Simon stood just at the edge of the tree line. His eyebrows were raised as he stared at me, and he was still laughing. I don't think I had heard him laugh yet, and it didn't sound very natural to him either. I noticed little dimples on each of his cheeks as he laughed. Even in the moonlight, his slicked back hair and the full pea suit looked impressive. He started to walk closer, and I noticed that even though he was laughing, his smile was cool. "You have a crush on me." Shit, my heart was beating violently, and as Simon headed toward me, my entire body froze. Chapter 10, Punishment Delivered. Alice's Paul. Simon continued to walk towards me, and I panicked. I wasn't scared of him, but I was scared of his reaction. I had no idea why he laughed, but I knew he wasn't laughing because he was happy. There was no smile in his eyes. Great. After annoying him in the morning, I touched his nerve again. I stood there and watched him come towards me. I tried not to show my nervousness, but my feet just couldn't move. Olivia was stuck in the mud, and I was stuck in Simon's gaze. Our situations were different, but it was somewhat the same. Maybe I shouldn't have used Simon to scare Olivia. He eventually would hear about it from someone else if he didn't show up at this moment. But now he was here, and earlier than I expected. I thought I would be waiting until dawn. Suddenly, my ankle was grabbed by a hand. Olivia reached out of the mud puddle and pulled on me, trying to use me to climb up. Because I was distracted and let my guard down, I was dragged backward and almost fell. Her sharp nails scratched my ankle and made me tingle. God, why am I always getting hurt in the same place? I kicked the struggling Olivia down to help myself keep balance. Olivia cursed and let go of my foot. There was no doubt she wanted to turn into a shifter, rush up, and tear me to pieces, but that would only make her sink deeper and faster in the mud. It was more beneficial for her to maintain a light figure. The mud grabbed onto Olivia and wouldn't release her. "Ugly bitch, help me out," she shouted, the anger in her eyes evident. "When I get up, you will definitely be punished, you stupid pig. Why are you just standing there? Yeah, help me." "Princess Olivia," I said, pretending to be concerned. "Oh my, what can I do?" "Stupid bitch, pull me out. Don't you have your damn eyes?" Olivia cursed at me loudly and struggled, but it only made her fall faster. Muddy water splashed on her face, hitting her eyes and mouth. But despite it all, she continued to insult me with horrid words. "Princess Olivia, I can't pull you out. You know, I'm not as strong as you," I explained expressionlessly. "Stupid bitch, can't you ask someone for help?" she screamed while spitting muddy water. It was about to flood her mouth. I saw nothing in her expression but pure rage. She wasn't scared that she might die. She was angry that I was the one that put her in that position. I considered being the bigger person and helping her. But then I remembered all the times she had beaten me to within an inch of my life. The second she got out of that hole, she would attack me twice as hard, and I couldn't let that happen. Not anymore. And even if I ran to ask for help, how could those shifters help me? Thanks to their years of bullying, no shifter would even think of listening to me. They would only think that another good show was about to begin. This was the bitter fruit of Olivia's brewing. I used my claws to slide back away from the mud hole, and then I stood up. It was only then that I remembered Simon here. He saw what I was again. Now, I was blocking Simon from getting to Olivia, and he stopped right in front of me. "Are you really William's maid?" he asked, throwing me for a loop. What I swore he'd be asking about Olivia, not me. "You believe that too?" I asked with a groan. Simon laughed, seeming to accept that answer. He then countered with another question. "So you didn't answer me earlier. Do you really have a crush on me?" I stared at him, trying to decide what he most wanted to hear. I chose not to fool him. "You can believe it if you want." I finally said this was a safe answer. Whether he liked me or not, it wouldn't be an offense. I didn't forget that my goal tonight was to get him to agree to continue teaching me, and in doing so, I needed to please him no matter what. I knew he was not short of likes. The maids in the palace were always talking about him. As long as he put away his indifferent attitude, countless women would be willing to climb into his bed. But still, I needed every advantage I had. Mr. Simon, you are the most respectable person I have ever met. A great good man. If possible, can you continue to be my teacher? I know I offended you in the morning, and I have done a serious introspection.
But you must know that it doesn't mean I do not trust you, but I have subconsciously regarded you as a close elder, I said in my sweetest voice.
An elder, am I that old? He asked. No, I mean, you are mature. You are my respected teacher. I clarified. He smiled, and I knew that he didn't believe me. How was this man so immune to my bullshit? Granted, maybe he just didn't believe anyone like me. He was not a simple person. Maybe he understood me more than I knew. I honestly didn't know if I could recognize the truth anymore. Maybe Simon would help me discover it. Just as I thought that Simon charged at me, I had never actually had hand-to-hand combat with him, and now I saw what all of the hype was about. I somehow managed to dodge his first blow. But once I saw the claws sticking out of my hands, I stiffened up. Simon took instant advantage of this and knocked me aside without so much as a wrinkle in his suit. As soon as I was out of the way, he took it as an opportunity to save Olivia from the mud hole. I glared as I watched him help another of my lifelong abusers escape punishment. Olivia was exhausted at this point from trying to fight against the mud. She opened her eyes to see that Simon was rescuing her and proceeded to faint. Simon easily grabbed her and pulled her from the mud hole in one smooth pull. I was pettily satisfied to see his nice suit get covered in mud, not so perfect anymore. I rolled over and got to my feet, still glaring at the man that seemed to be dead set on ruining my life. Or at least keeping the people that ruined my life alive. The anger was rolling through my body. But then Simon looked over at me and smiled. It was almost as if he was taunting me, but I couldn't help but think that the curve of his lips as he smiled made him look much more charming and mysterious. Simon carelessly dropped Olivia a safe distance from the water's edge where the ground was completely dry and turned back to look at me. I opened my mouth to speak, but he held up a finger to cut me off and reached into multiple pockets before he pulled out his phone. Then he proceeded to call. Ellen, are you still here? Simon looked down at Olivia. I have a situation down by the lake. Could you come by? Thanks. He hung up the phone and slid it back into his pocket, but not the same pocket he had pulled it out of. Then he gestured to me.
Okay, you may continue with whatever tirade you were about to do, he said with a smile.
It was hard to be mad at someone that was smiling. Do you like saving people that much? I asked saltily. Do you have a god complex or something? Simon laughed and kicked the unconscious Olivia at his feet. I could care less about this dissy, weak princess. I doubt she will make it long in this world anyway, he said. I just saved her to tick you off. I stared at him for a moment, debating how serious he was. Was he messing with me? I stared into his eyes, and I couldn't tell if it was humor or annoyance that I saw sparkling there. Gosh, why did the one guy immune to my physical abilities have to also be so hard for me to get a read on? The fact that I couldn't tell what he was thinking was starting to drive me crazy. The shifters might be awful to me, but at least I knew they were honest. Either way, he was a dick. To answer your earlier question, why in the hell would I like someone like you? I blurted out angrily, did you seriously do this just to get under my skin? That is evil. Simon's face raised in a smile again, but it didn't reach his eyes this time. There was a commotion behind me that saved Simon from having to respond to me. It was Alan. A cool mask covered both my and Simon's faces as he approached. Whoa, you guys are giving me the same look right now, Alan said, staring back and forth. Are you guys similar? No, don't even suggest that, I said in disgust as I was still upset. Simon didn't say anything. He just turned and gestured to Olivia's body, lying crumpled on the dirt. There was a slight incident between Miss Olivia and Alice, and I was hoping that you could possibly carry her to the nearest guard. Simon deflected. Let them know that she needs to have a checkup, but she should be fine with just a bit of rest. Can do, Alan said with a nod. What about Alice? She needs to stay here. Simon's eyes drifted back to me. She still needs to be punished. My stomach dropped. Alan just nodded and gave me a sympathetic look before hauling up Olivia and taking off. I stood there nervously. As I had said earlier, I didn't really believe that Simon would hurt me, but my body had a natural response to the word punishment at this point. I looked down at my hands and realized they were still claws. I instantly grabbed one and started to rip it out as Simon watched. In relief, I felt the mutation fading as the pain brought me back. I took a couple of steps forward to wash my hands in the lake, attempting to get rid of all of the blood. Why don't you take advantage of your mutations? Simon asked into the silence you always rejected. Even when you were fighting me, you could have used those things to help you win. I'm not trying to attack you, but in case you didn't notice, shifters and I don't really get along. I scrubbed my hands to avoid looking at him. Over the years, I've associated the wolf blood or the gene with all the negative aspects of a character. I know humans that treat me millions of times better than these shifters ever have. You can't represent a whole race off of one pack, Simon said sternly. Really, I asked incredulously and looked at him because last I checked, you weren't from this pack and you treated me just like them when you met me, weak and beneath you. Simon looked contemplative as I talked as if he was just trying to understand me. There was no pity on his face or guilt, and I appreciated that. Did I treat you negatively, though? Simon asked, besides calling you weak. Can we just get on with the punishment? I asked as I stood up. Nothing is getting done by just sitting here talking. Fine, Simon said, and stepped closer to me. First thing, though, how is the ankle feeling? You seem to be moving all right, but is there any pain? Nope, all good, I said, and bent it in all directions to prove it to him. Perfect. Then you should have no problems tonight. Simon paused. Now I want you to understand what you are being punished for. 3 things. First, for that phone call that I received where you were screaming at me. I am the teacher here, not you, and I will make this schedule or cancel training as I see fit. Second, for trying to murder one of your family members again. And third, for using me as a ploy in one of your dangerous games. I'm sure that you said you had a crush on me to provide an impact, but leave me out of it. I stared at him in anger. You have got to be fucking kidding me, I said flatly. Perfect, you understand. And even though his voice was serious, I could see him trying to hide a laugh. Then get to running. Your punishment is to run laps around the lake until dawn. Laps again, I said, in exasperation, but deep down, I was glad. If I just got punished, it meant that he didn't give up on me. The punishments were usually much worse for me. And you better run fast, because if I see you slow at all, I will be throwing my pebbles again, Simon said as he retreated to his tree. And we don't want a repeat of what happened last time, so I suggest you get a move on. Suck my dick, I yelled at him as I began my lap. His laughter came out a little more natural that time, and I couldn't help the smile I felt creep up on me. Chapter 11, Racing Emotion. Alice's public. I took back my previous thoughts about punishments. I really hate running laps. It was almost dawn, but I still couldn't stop. Whenever I stopped, Simon would hit me with a pebble. I was not a kid anymore, but he still punished me for my behavior somehow. That made it even more humiliating. Curse him.
At this point, I was over putting on the act for Simon. He never fell for it anyway. So what was the point? I threw away my usual sweet smile and disguise and became who I truly was on the inside, a mouthy shrew.
I had been running for hours at this point, and my patience was running thin the more and more exhausted I got. I never took my eyes off him, and I scolded him every time I ran by the tree that he was leisurely sitting in. Once more. I can't believe you saved Olivia. Didn't you hear what she was yelling at me? Oh, I said the 30th time I had run past, but Simon had no reply. The 43rd time by maybe if you didn't disappear or go off on your own, I wouldn't have had to call you. The 51st time by I'll never say I have a crush on you again. Trust me. The 64th time by why don't you just chain me up and give me to William while you're there? You probably want him to take me away. And I just kept going and going. The longer I went, the more tired I got, and my insults stopped being so narrow and were much broader, not to mention a lot more vulgar. I hate you was repeated a few times. Along with go back to the other country and fuck you. As well as aren't you tired of me yet? But none of my efforts prevailed. Simon still sat in his tree, smiling at me. If anything, he was probably just trying to come up with more punishments for me. But I didn't care. This was the one time I felt like I could let myself out and not be at risk of dying. I tried to say something else, but my mouth was too dry. My legs gave out, and I stumbled in front of his tree. Simon instantly hopped down, but I was already back on my feet, attempting another lap. As I neared Simon on my way back around, I noticed that he was leaning against the tree, still waiting for me. I stopped and was going to say something snarky to him, but my voice still wouldn't come out. So I just stared at him with my best angry eyes, knowing he would get the message. He must have gotten the wrong message because he grabbed me around the waist and lifted me to turn and pressed me against the tree. I had let out a small gasp because he had surprised me, but I kept my eyes fierce as I stared at him. Simon stared back. I could feel his breath on my face. However, he didn't seem to be upset with me. I thought he was standing there to punish me for my sass all night. But he actually had a slight smile on his face as if he thought what I was doing was humorous. Then he surprised me again by pinning me to the tree with his body and lifting one of his hands to cover my eyes. I paused, not even breathing, as I waited for what he was going to do next. Was he going to kiss me? Most of the time I would wish not. But right now, with my adrenaline pumping and his body pressed up against mine, it sounded better and better. I couldn't help but lick my lips. Though, the dry mouth didn't really help that. What was I thinking? For the record, Simon said softly, I don't think William is your mate, and I put him and James in their place earlier after you left. Why had he done that? Eunice's body still pressed against me, and I tried my hardest not to have it respond in any way and to control my breathing. I thought about fighting him off of me, but knew there was no point. He was too strong, and I wouldn't get away. I felt him lean in, and I braced myself. But then I felt his lips against my ear as he whispered, Your eyes are really ugly. The rage and shock at what he said snapped my mutation out of me. I felt the teeth and the claws fully extend, and I snapped out at him. Too slow, he said, uncovering my eyes to pin my claws to the tree. Now, instead, I looked at him in pure rage. He was taunting me. Simon seemed to realize how upset I was getting because then he said something that he knew would make me happy. and say you are officially ready to begin learning fighting techniques," Simon announced, and I felt my rage ebb slightly. Finally, Simon spoke. I couldn't help but smile as Alice threw insult after insult in my direction. This girl was fiery. I leaned back from my sitting position in the tree and listened with pleasure. My wallet somehow found its way into my hand and I squeezed it. I didn't bother to open it and look at the picture that was inside it. My memory was good enough. Alice and my sister-in-law were nothing alike. The picture I kept in my wallet was that of my sister-in-law. She was beautiful, as was Alice, but her words were always kind and gentle. That softness is what saved me from myself during that time in my life. Wait, had I just thought of Alice as beautiful? I watched the girl that was running around the track hurling angry and vulgar curses with no regard for ladylike manners. She had been at it for a while and was now covered in sweat on top of the mud that had already covered her body. She never took her eyes off of me, though, and I could see that they were as bright as fire. I found myself suddenly moved by this girl and her passion. Alice was very different from my sister-in-law, but somehow she also invigorated me. I had sat there and listened to her scold me all night and was beginning to feel not so alone. No matter where she ran, she still kept her eyes on me, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. Right. As I began to drop out of the tree, Alice tripped and stumbled to the ground. I moved quickly to check and see if she was all right. Maybe it was her ankle. But she was quicker than me and was already up and running again before I could reach her. I sighed with a smile and leaned back against the tree, waiting for her to make her way back to me. As she neared me again, I internally laughed. Her mouth had gone dry and she hadn't been able to scold me for almost an hour now, but the look on her face told me that she still wanted to. She saw me standing there waiting for her and walked up before stopping in front of me. She opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something, but her voice still cracked and she was unable to. The anger on her face doubled as she glared me down. If she could breathe fire, she would be. I got the message she was mad. We were close enough that I could feel her breath huffing against me. Without thinking, I picked her up by her tiny waist and turned her around so that I could pin her to the tree behind me. She looked surprised, but she didn't fight me, even with me pinning her down. Her silver gray eyes bore into me, fearlessly. I adjusted myself so that now I was pinning her with my body and reached one hand up to cover her eyes. I felt her body press up against mine. It sounded like she had quit breathing. Without her wicked eyes, Alice looked heavenly. I looked at her with her long hair and shawl and thought she looked gentle and kind. Dawn was breaking and the rays fell onto her. It was almost as if she was bathed in holy light. Although she was covered in mud and sweat, her beauty was not affected in the slightest. I had noticed she was beautiful when I first saw her, but it hadn't affected me as it did now. For the record, I said softly, I don't think William is your mate, and I put him and James in their place earlier after you left. She seemed to still be beneath me. Her true character strived for offensive power and the ability to defend herself, and that characteristic was impressive. I stood there and stared at her. Then I watched as she licked her lips, and I felt my breath catch slightly. My heart pounded. I took in the rest of her and realized that she was still hardly breathing herself. She was nervous. Maybe I was wrong earlier. Maybe Alice really did have a crush on me. I had been able to tell that she had used that line as an intimidation tactic with Olivia, but looking at her now made me uncertain if maybe there wasn't truth behind it. Her body was still pressed up against mine, whether in response to my touch or to get distance from the tree. I wasn't sure, but she was definitely reacting to me. She still hadn't fought me off. I found myself wishing that she wouldn't. What was this girl doing to me? If it had been my youth, I would have gone on the offensive without hesitation. But now I can't. Alice said she treated me as a close elder. I knew it couldn't be true. I'm not the man I used to be. I knew what it was like to love someone, but Alice clearly didn't understand. She was too young. Once more, I acted without thinking as I bent down and pressed my lips against her ear. I felt her shudder, and I almost gave in. But instead, I said something I knew would trigger her and piss her off. Your eyes are really ugly, I whispered. I heard a growl rip from her chest and felt her body shudder. The mutation was happening just as I had planned. She snapped at me with wolf fangs, and I quickly reacted. I pulled my head back and readjusted so that I was now pinning her wolf claws to the tree as well. She stared at me with wild eyes. Too slow, I teased, and I felt her attempt to shove me off. But my body was pressed firmly against hers, keeping her in place. Her eyes burned even brighter, and I saw fur start to pop up over her gorgeous face. I wondered how far the mutation would go, but now was not the time to figure that out. So instead, I worked on calming her down. I'd say you are officially ready to begin learning fighting techniques, I announced, watching her rage ebb slightly. Alice was not simple by any means, but I was starting to understand her. Now I just needed to understand what she was. After our training session, Alice left to go and, as she put it, crash for as long as humanly possible. In turn, I headed into my office. I wouldn't show it to anyone, but I was exhausted as well. The late night training with Alice was starting to take its toll on me. I could stop training Alice and get some of my free time back, but even thinking that made my body crawl. I can't abandon her now, I whispered to myself in the dark office. At my words, I felt a rush of power and looked to my side to see a portal opening. After it was fully open, I watched as Sophia stepped through. She had a smile on her face. Hello, Simon, the older witch said as a greeting. Sophia was a witch from my original continent, and she was the reason I was here. She had thought it was a good idea for me to get some space from my family after everything with my older brother had happened. My family had always been close to her, and she had a soft spot for me. After a whole night of remembering my past, more specifically, the people in my past, I was excited to see her. Sophia, any news? I asked, trying not to sound eager. Your brother and sister-in-law wanted me to tell you they miss you very much and constantly ask when you will return. Sophia stepped away but left the portal open behind herself. When my business is done here, I'll come back. I told her, slightly annoyed she already knew this. You always have been a stubborn boy. Even when you were a child, she said with a genuine smile. Fine, I have other news for you too. Then I found some answers for what you asked me to look up. My interest was piqued. Go on. I have been able to determine from the blood sample that you gave me that the mutated rogues are related to the human race. It doesn't look as if they were born with any natural wolf genes. She explained. I also discovered that many humans are hiding around the palace where you are staying. What about you? What have you discovered so far in this location? I found a girl in the palace that I think might be related to the mutated rogues. I explained to her. Everyone says she does not have a wolf, but I have seen her body transform in sections as I have watched her. She is the oldest daughter of the Alpha King, but he is extremely vague whenever I have asked him questions pertaining to her. The alpha of the pack I had been staying with seemed to know more as well. Last year, when this pack experienced its first mutated rogue attack, he seemed to be familiar with their kind. I have begun to train her in hopes that I will learn more about her and them. Alice is picking up everything very quickly and seems to have a higher tolerance for pain. Though I'm not sure if that is from her mutation or from the treatment she receives from the pack. It sounds like you are growing attached to her, Sophia suddenly said, startling me. I glared at her in surprise. I knew the obvious answer, but I still didn't want to admit it. I had always let my emotions get the best of me when I was younger, and I was trying not to do the same. Now, she is my answer, I stated simply, which was half true. If you say so, she gave me one of her mischievous grins, the one that I had picked up as a child. Don't forget where you belong. And with that, she disappeared back through her portal. Gone just as quickly as she came. Chapter 12, A Little Revenge. Alice's paw. I wiped the sweat off my brow and brushed the dirt off of my hands. The sense of accomplishment I felt as I looked at my final trap made it worth it. The last few nights had been full of Simon teasing me, so I decided that I was going to get him back. After the night when he made me run until dawn, we officially started combat lessons. However, it wasn't in the way I was expecting or hoping. He had been provoking and teasing me every night until I would mutate. Simon believed that for me to be truly strong, that I needed to quit rejecting my mutations and use them to fight, and it pissed me off. I knew that shifter blood was stronger, but that didn't mean I magically liked it. So he had to provoke me every night in order to get me to change. Simon would corner me or rush me or do whatever he thought necessary until I would shift. Most of the time, it was rage that caused me to shift, but occasionally it was pain as well, or even surprise if he had reacted in a way I wasn't expecting. Like when he had hugged me. I shook my head and looked around myself. After last night, I had made the decision that I was not going to lose so easily to him again. So I had found time to sneak away from my duties to come and set some traps for him. If he tried to come at me tonight, I would lead him into any one of these traps. And hopefully that would give me the upper hand and I would finally get a hit on him at least. I wasn't naive enough to believe that I could beat him yet. Done with all of the traps, I set off back to the palace to wait until our training time. As I neared the palace, I could hear the sounds of a skirmish from the training grounds. I slid behind a tree, hoping that I would be able to watch some. The rest of the princes and princesses had still not returned for training, so it was just a small group containing Simon, William, James, and Olivia. Olivia seemed to be standing back, letting the boys fight. William and James, on the other hand, kept charging at Simon, attempting to catch him. Simon, in his wrinkle-free suit, evaded and dodged them as if it was nothing. Then after a few minutes, he smacked down hard on the back of their heads, dropping them to their knees. That's enough for today, boys, Simon said with a sigh. I am expecting more progress the next time I see you. I have been here for weeks, so you should be able to at least land a hit on me if you don't improve. I fear that I will have to drop you from my program. And with that, he walked away from them and towards the castle. Olivia darted off ahead of him, not wanting to get the same lecture. It took James and William a moment longer to stand up and collect themselves before they started to head off as well. With Simon gone, they began to talk smack. That guy is a fucking asshole, James growled. Just once, I want to knock him on his ass and see what he has to say then. William grumbled in agreement. He hates us. Maybe it isn't hate. Maybe he just has a crush on us, James said nastily. We did see him hugging that dude by the lake last night. I looked down at myself, dressed in my men's clothes for training. Simon had hugged me by the lake last night. They must have misunderstood and thought I was a guy. It was pretty dark last night with the moonlight covered with clouds. Seemed pretty intimate to me, man. James continued, he's probably gay and just has the hots for us. Yeah, maybe you're right, William said, agreeing with him as always. I bet if we tell my dad, he'll get rid of him. I could barely hear James as they got too far away. I watched as they entered the palace. I couldn't help but laugh once they were gone. Simon Gay, even though he had never given me the feeling that he was into romantic relationships in general, the idea of him liking guys was unfathomable. Or maybe I just didn't want to believe it. I shook my head and went to my room to pass the time and then left again to head to training. The sun wasn't all of the way down yet, but I was impatient, especially since now I wanted to tell Simon all the gossip I had just heard. Simon wasn't outside at the lake yet, so I walked to his room and knocked on the door. I heard him respond and only had to wait for a few seconds for the door to swing open. He stood there, just in his button up and his suit pants. Come in, he said, standing to the side. I just need to get my jacket, and we can proceed with training. I walked just inside the door as he stalked off. So guess what I heard today? I asked, unable to keep it in any longer. He said, obviously not that interested. Apparently, James and William are convinced that you are gay and that you are so hard on them because you have a crush. I couldn't help the smile that spread across my face. Simon actually looked at me, giving me his attention. He looked genuinely confused. Why would they have an idea like that? He asked. Well, apparently they came over here last night to try and sneak up on you and saw you hug me. Since I was in boys' clothes, they thought that I was a guy and they thought it looked intimate. Therefore, they thought you were gay. Simon surprised me by breaking out in laughter. So what you're telling me is that they thought you were a boy. The amusement was clear on his face. That's what you get out of that. I asked in exasperation, not the gossip about you, but the part about me. Of course, I don't care what people think or say of me, and I believed him. But what they said about you is classic. Thanks for the support. I crossed my arms across my chest. Wait here, I have the perfect thing for this, he said, and ducked out for a moment. He returned just a moment later, holding another one of his vials in his hands. He held it out to me, but I hesitated in grabbing it. What is it? I suspiciously asked. It's a potion for disguises, Simon said, and he couldn't hide the smile on his face. Just trust me. I didn't trust him, though I didn't trust anyone. Realizing that I wasn't going to take it willingly, he suddenly tackled me to the floor and pinned my arms down with his knee. I watched in horror as he took the stopper out of the vial and poured the contents into my mouth. I coughed and sputtered as he released me from his pin, but the damage had been done. I could still taste the vile potion on my tongue. What was that? I gasped between coughs. What did you do to me? Simon continued to laugh as he stood up and pulled me up with him. It's just to help you look like a guy, he said. And I looked at him in shock. I hadn't seen this playful side of Simon yet, and I didn't know what to think of it. The only thing that made me not attack him right now was the fact that he was laughing. He didn't do it much. And I thought it sounded nice. What exactly does it do? I asked, but the tingling on my chin gave me my answer before Simon could. I put my hand on my chin and felt long, beautiful hair growing out slowly. It was my normal human hair, though. It wasn't the thick, coarse shifter hair that came about during one of my mutations. Simon had given me a beard. His laughter doubled. A beard, I shrieked, an octave higher than normal. I didn't see myself as conceited or focused on my looks. but I knew that I was a beautiful girl, which was the one thing I could always rely on. My beauty has saved me multiple times throughout the year. How was I supposed to trick people into helping me if I had a beard? I'd be hideous. That's not even the best part. Simon said through his laughter, you can't shave that beard either because it is magical and will keep growing back. I stared at him in horror. Simon looked at me again and laughed, and I instantly turned self-conscious. I turned and ran out of his room, forgetting all about the plans to train for the night. Despite his calls for me to stop, I ran all the way to my room, intent on nobody else seeing me like this. Once back in my room with the door shut, I angrily started to plan my revenge. If Simon wanted a potion war, then that is what I would give him. I pulled out one of the books my mother had left me about plants. She was a scientist. Joan gave these books to me to help me learn about my mother and the human world. She told me that it was a gift from her. I wasn't sure if these books would ever come in handy. But over the years, I had learned a few things and used the recipes inside to concoct potions to get revenge on Olivia and James. Only now Simon was at the top of my list. Luckily, I found the plant might help me to revenge on one of the pages of the book. This plant was common in royal palaces, but no one ever noticed them. Their rhizomes can even be used as medicinal herbs to treat trauma, but since injuries are rare for shifters, the plant does nothing for them. I remembered what the image looked like and closed the book. At that moment, I saw the words on the title page. To Alice, life is beautiful, precious, and worthy of awe. My gaze froze. I stroked the words. They were beautiful, handwritten, and old. They appeared in every book Joan gave me, and she told me it was written by my mother. I hadn't met her, and to this day I couldn't understand the meaning of this sentence. If life was beautiful, then why were those shifters so awful? If life was precious, why was my existence a curse? If life was worthy of all, why has no one ever respected me? As usual, I put the book back in my secret bookcase and moved to lie back on the bed when I happened to catch a glimpse of myself in my mirror. I had a full-blown beard across the entire bottom half of my face, which was thick, so you couldn't even see my skin through it. Angry and not wanting to look at it, I hid back under my covers, praying that it would be gone by morning. When I woke up, I was distraught to see that it was still there. I let the other maids know I was sick and curled up, determined not to leave my room all day. I already got bullied enough as it was. I didn't need to add this to their list. After a few hours, I heard a soft knock on the door and Joan walked in. She looked shocked as she took in the state of my face. What happened to you? How do you have a beard? She looked flabbergasted. Oh, someone just decided to play a prank on me. I still hadn't told her about my training sessions with Simon, and this didn't seem like the time to bring it up. Honey, I'm sorry, she said, and I noticed that she was carrying a tray of food in her hands. Is that for me? I asked, hopeful. No, actually, Mr. Simon requests that you bring his food today and won't accept anyone else. She shifted nervously. I tried to tell him you were sick, but he was adamant. And as a respected guest here, I have no option other than to appease him. I'm sorry. No, it's fine, I said as my anger flared up. Just leave it here. And I will get dressed and take it to him. He's at the training grounds now, she said, and my stomach dropped slightly. Of course, he couldn't be alone. He was torturing me. Joan set it down and with an apologetic nod, left to get back to work. I hurried and put on my maid dress and then grabbed a hat and a scarf to wrap around my face and hopefully hide the beard. Satisfied with my appearance in the mirror, I squeezed the sap of that plant on his food. It didn't taste much or change the taste of the food either. Therefore, it only took a little bit to get my revenge. I picked up the tray and headed to the training grounds. Multiple people hung around since it was still early, and they all looked at me confusedly. It was still late summer here, and it was way too warm for me to be wearing a hat and a scarf, so it was drawing attention. I set Simon's tray down and then stepped back. I wanted to wait and watch to make sure that he ate it all. A smile crossed my face as I saw him eat every last bite. Simon stepped in front of me, blocking me from the view of the shifters behind him. I looked at him in surprise. If he was trying to torture me, then why was he protecting me now? He let out a low chuckle that only I could hear. Only you could still be so good looking with a full grown beard, he whispered, and I couldn't help it as my heart skipped a beat. I looked at him in surprise, my hands dropping from my face slightly. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Simon said, unless you want everyone to see I can only cover so much. You might want to get out of here if you don't want to be embarrassed. The same could be said for you, I said smugly. He looked at me in confusion. Why do you say that? I drugged your food. I was thrilled at the look of surprise that covered his face. Any minute, now your entire face will be covered in acne. Simon stared at me. I wasn't sure if he was going to yell at me or not. But then he gave another chuckle and turned slightly to put his hand on my back and guide me away. Then what do you say? We go hide out together. Mm-hmm. What had gotten into him? Chapter 13, Antidote, Alice's Paul. Simon guided me towards his separate housing, keeping his warm hand pressed against my back the entire way. Despite whether I saw anyone else or not, I kept my face covered. It wasn't until Simon had shut the door that I began to lower my hand, but even still, his presence alone was enough to make me doubt myself. So I self-consciously turned away so that he wouldn't be able to see me. He had made a good comment that he didn't think that the beard had made me ugly, but that didn't mean I liked it. This is new, Simon said from behind me. I turned my head slightly to see him staring at himself in the mirror. There were angry red spots across his entire face, and even from this distance, I could see the whiteheads. It was the worst-looking acne I had ever seen. Even though I should be disgusted, I couldn't help the roar of laughter that came out of me as I stared at him. Simon looked at me in surprise, but then laughed as well. I tried to gather myself. Only you could still be so good, looking with your face covered in acne. I joked. As soon as I was able to talk, I saw Simon's eyes spark, and he started to walk up to me. Really, that's what you're thinking about? He asked as he walked up to me. Actually, I'm thinking about how great that would have worked on Olivia. I laughed again. She would have been absolutely miserable. Oh. So that's why you had it. Simon put his hand up to his face, and I was worried a couple would burst. I was wondering on the way here why you had a potion just laying around. I made it myself, I said with a shrug, not wanting to give too much away. Simon already knew me better than probably anyone, even Joan. For some reason, I was unable to keep anything from him. I couldn't control what I was saying, which in itself was dangerous. I'm assuming that you don't happen to have an antidote by chance then? Simon asked, stopping in front of me. If I did, why would I give it to you? I gestured to myself. Have you seen my face? Okay, so then why don't we give each other the antidotes at the same time? He suggested. Crip. Honestly, I didn't have an antidote, but I really wanted the one from Simon. I couldn't have a beard for the rest of my life. So before I could think about it, I agreed. I can handle that. I said, Perfect, Simon said unquestioningly. I'll go get the one for you. As soon as he left the room, I panicked and searched around frantically. I was trying to find anything that I could play off as an antidote in order to get mine first. He didn't have to know that it was fake. I happened upon a piece of hard candy that I had stolen from the kitchen earlier and figured that it would have to do. I was just finishing taking the wrapper off when Simon walked back into the room. I shoved the wrapper into my pocket before he could notice. He confidently walked up to me, and I couldn't help but laugh at seeing his face again. Hey, that's not very nice. Simon laughed back. Let's just hurry and take care of this, so that way you will take me seriously. Again, he held out his hand, and I saw a small ball in his hand. I inwardly sighed in relief. He did have an antidote, but I still didn't dare to relax because when he got my candy, he would immediately find out that it wasn't an antidote. I needed to find a way for him to take it without question. I eyed the item in his hand. What? Simon asked, raising a brow at me. I don't trust that you'll give me it once I give you mine, I said suspiciously. Simon laughed seriously, even after our conversation about trusting the teachers. I shook my head and refused to take the ball. He sighed. All right, how about this then? Why don't we feed each other the antidote then? Neither of us can back out. I hesitated, then agreed. Fine deal, I couldn't think of a better idea. This seemed to be the best way to go. The moment he tastes the sweetness, the antidote would already be working its magic on me. Simon smiled to himself, and my stomach knotted. Was my stomach knotting? I stood on my tiptoes and lifted my hand with the candy in it to his mouth while he bent down and handed the antidote to me. I stopped just short of him and stared directly his lip. They were lighter in color and perfectly shaped. When they didn't hook upwards, they looked a little callous, and then I remembered the two charming dimples next to them. When he did smile, I pressed the candy to Simon's lips, but he didn't open his mouth. My hand touched a little soft, and Simon's burning breath sprayed on my fingers, making me stiffen. My ears warmed up. He laughed, and my heart beat faster. Alice, I think you're hiding something from me. His voice was a little hoarse. I could feel his gaze on me heating up with scrutiny. What? I'm just feeding you the antidote. I had a hard mouth. I was all over the place. If Simon already knew I was cheating him, he was deliberately playing with me. But how was that possible? A little moist softness pierced my fingertips like electricity. Before I could react, Simon had swallowed the candy at my fingertip. I couldn't describe what it was like. I exclaimed uncontrollably, and the next moment, something round slipped into my lip. I could still feel the cold touch of his fingertip, but he had already pulled away, stood up straight, and looked at me with a smile. My face must be very red by now. I glanced away, not daring to look at him. The antidote was in my mouth. My cheeks were bulging, and I was a little numb. It took a while before I tasted a hint of sweetness. Wait, sweetness. I couldn't help but look up at him. He was also looking at me, and his eyes were soft as spring water. He had a pleasant smile on his lips, and small dimples looming on the side of his cheeks, like the ripples stirred up by raindrops falling in a lake. Why is this antidote sweet? I asked with suspicion. I would also like to ask this question. It seems that we thought about the same thing. He was still smiling, and I knew he must have found that. I rushed to the mirror and waited for the hair to disappear, but nothing was happening. At that moment, Simon finally couldn't help but laugh. I had never seen him laugh so happily. And then it hit me. He had also given me candy. Alice, you remember, I am your teacher, a teacher in every sense. He clarified his laugh. These tricks you use, I used a long time ago. I'm sorry to tell you that I probably know you better than you think. You give me the antidote right now. I ordered. I don't have one either, he shrugged. You've got to be joking me, I said in disbelief. As a kid, I specialized in causing mischief, not fixing it, Simon explained, and that surprised me. But you are not a child anymore. You are my teacher now, I shouted. So I'm teaching you that when you're going to play a prank, you better think about whether this person is someone you can afford to mess with. It's also a lesson for you. He walked to me and trapped me in a small space in front of the mirror. I could feel the breath from him on my face. Under the thick beard, my face burned. I suddenly felt a little lucky that it covered it up. Alice, the next time you provoke another person, be sure to assess whether you can deal with the consequences. Although I wouldn't want that to happen, I have to make you remember it. His eyes darkened and he whispered in my ear, his moist breath sprayed, making my ears itch and making the mirror surface fog. I stared at his Adam's apple, watching it move as he spoke, and then nodded subconsciously. I heard his muffled laughter. Good girl, he whispered before he finally let me go and returned to his usual serious self. I blinked rapidly. It was like nothing had happened. He was a mystery. When I first met him, he seemed so serious and stern all the time. But today showed me a different side. He was playful and he had started to laugh and smile more around me before. I thought every man wanted me, but now I was confused. Did he want me? I was not sure. He was a powerful and dangerous male shifter. However, he was different from the others. Here, everyone wanted to hurt me, but he taught me how to protect myself more than once. Then I realized what he just said. So you are telling me that there is no cure? Oh, I shouted. Good thing nobody else lived in this part. What the hell am I supposed to do? Calm down, calm down. Simon's voice was smoother as he realized I was freaking out. He placed his hand on my shoulder as if to bring me back to earth. The effects of the potion wear off with time. The one you gave me is similar as well. Cosmetic changing potions are never all lasting. A sigh of relief came out of my mouth, and I tried to calm down my breathing again. Simon spoke again as I was collecting myself. Aren't you happy? This means you get to spend all day with me instead of working. A tightness formed in my stomach and I felt my face flush. I was suddenly hyper-aware of Simon's hand still on my shoulder. What should we do? I asked quietly. You know what I really want to do? Simon spoke gruffly and stepped closer to me. My breath caught in my throat as he leaned in even closer. I didn't move. Then he quickly leaned back with that devilish grin again and pulled out a pack of cards. Play some card games, he exclaimed, and I had to fight back the urge to kick him in the shin. He had done that on purpose to make the game more interesting. Let's set a rule. If I lose, you can ask me some questions about me. Conversely, if you lose, I can also ask you questions we can choose not to answer, but for the sake of fairness in the game, we can't lie, he suggested, with his light brown eyes shining warmly. I knew this game is not simple, but I wanted to get to know him, and honestly, I couldn't resist the temptation and I was smart. I reluctantly agreed, and we sat down and started. To my surprise, he really knew how to play cards. I hardly ever won. Nor did he ask any difficult questions. It was more about my life at the palace before he came. It made me feel that if I didn't answer him, there was a problem. Who named you Alice? My mother. She died when I was born. But Joan told me Alice is the name she gave me. Do you have a last name? My full name is Alice Brown. You did not inherit the surname of the Alpha King. The Alpha King never claimed me as his daughter. I can't use his last name, I guess. Brown is from my mom's side. So who raised you? Joan, the chef in the palace. She worked here before I was born. She's like a mother to me. Another few rounds later, I continued to lose, and he continued to ask more questions. Are you often bullied by Olivia and James? Not only them, everyone in the palace, they just don't get tired of it. Olivia, especially if it weren't for you, they'd be long gone. I couldn't help but stare at him. Hey, it's also for your own good. He looked at me peacefully. In the daylight, his eyes were warm and calm, like clear amber stone. For some reason, this infuriated me. My own good? Oh, you must be kidding. I slammed my cards on the table and glared at him angrily. I suddenly didn't want to play anymore. There was no reason for him to be on my side. He was also Olivia's teacher, and they were his official students. Letting them live was his duty. But he now says he's doing this for my own good. I was pissed. He didn't know that I was beaten to death by Olivia and James on a daily basis, or that the Alpha King didn't care enough to claim me, but wouldn't let me out of the palace all the same. I didn't survive because of anyone's kindness, and I wasn't going to start. Now, a rush of soreness rushed to the tip of my nose, and I felt my eyes heat, but there were no tears. He looked at me in surprise as if he wanted to say something. At that moment, I felt my face begin to tingle and lifted my hands to feel my face. It was bare skin once more. I got up to check in the mirror just to be safe.
"See, just as beautiful as ever," Simon commented from the couch. He seemed to want to ease the tense atmosphere just now.
My cheeks reddened slightly, but I shook my head to ignore the sensation. Despite his comment, I was set on my revenge, and now was the time to act. If he thinks it's for my good to save Olivia, he needs to feel for himself how good Olivia is. You're so lucky, I said to him. My face would have to disagree, he said with a small laugh. The acne still covered it, but for some reason I didn't seem to notice it much. Now that my face is better, I better get going, I told him as I snuck a pen and a piece of paper into my pocket from the desk. Simon didn't seem to notice. Oh, I see how it is. You are just going to leave me to suffer alone, huh? You deserve it, I said with a shrug. Plus, I'll be back soon for training. Anyway, I need to head back and get a couple things done and change into my training clothes. I understand his voice sounded more serious again. I will see you at training. The tone of his voice made me look at him. Had I actually upset him? Did he actually want me to stay? I shook off the idea and walked out of the room. Chapter 14, Confessions of the Heart. Alice's Pavia. On the way back to the main palace, I stopped and pulled out the pen and paper from my dress pocket. Time for payback, and it would even kill two birds with one stone. I scribbled out a quick note to Olivia, pretending to be Simon, and asked her to meet him at our training spot. I couldn't help but smile at the wickedness of it. Simon would be teased romantically, since Olivia was not so easy to get rid of. She thought everyone should like her, although she was afraid of Simon. She would go crazy if she thought that he liked her, and Olivia would be humiliated, just like she attempted to do to me earlier. It was a win-win. Since I was already about, I finished up a couple of things to help Joan before getting back to my plan. The last thing I did was swing by the bedroom. Dropping the note off at her room, I hurried back to my own to change into my training clothes to get there as soon as possible. I needed to be there so I could eavesdrop and watch the humiliation myself. I found myself the perfect tree to hide behind where even Simon wouldn't be able to detect me. Then I sat up and waited with anticipation. First, I saw Simon walk out and to the usual spot that we met for training, right by the lake. He glanced around a few times as it got darker and darker, obviously waiting for me. I was usually early, so I had never got to experience this part of him waiting for me. If I was honest, it made me feel guilty.
I watched as he looked around continuously and his face went from annoyance to anger to worry. When he started to look fearful, I wanted to step out and go up to him to let him know that nothing had happened to me, but I stayed strong. Just as it looked like he might leave in search of me, I heard footsteps walking through the woods. Olivia's face popped out from the tree. If Simon's face had looked annoyed before, it was nothing compared to when he saw Olivia. He rushed up and grabbed her by the elbow, ripping her away from the trees. Olivia's face flushed so red when he touched her that I could see it from where I stood. "What are you doing here, Olivia?" Simon snapped at her. I wasn't going to lie, watching him talk down to Olivia was kind of turning me on. "I came, as you asked," Olivia said in her fake voice that had to be at least an octave higher. "What are you talking about now?" He sounded slightly confused with the anger. "I got your note." Olivia held it up, and I watched as Simon ripped it from her hand. "I just wanted to say thank you for saving me from the mud hole the other day. I've been too embarrassed to say anything since, but..." "Stop talking," Simon suddenly cut her off. Yeah. I had been watching him as he had read the note, but couldn't read his face. Did he think it was funny? Was he mad? I just couldn't tell from this far away. Then he did something I didn't expect. I watched as he tore up the note and then embraced Olivia. She gasped at the sudden reaction. My heart dropped down in my stomach, and before I knew it, I was stomping up to the two of them. This was supposed to be a prank. He wasn't supposed to hit it off with Olivia. He was supposed to reject her. I wasn't sure what I was going to do when I got to them, but I never got the chance. As soon as I was close enough, Simon's eyes flicked to me, and I saw his eyes sparkling with rage as he stared at me. He tossed Olivia off of himself and onto me. Olivia didn't even try to stand, and the weight of her dropped me to the ground. I managed to push her off of me, but by the time I did, Simon was gone. Why did he leave so suddenly? Was he really that angry? I waited a few moments for him to come back. He rarely left me without saying a word. Olivia groaned beside me, and I realized that she was unconscious. As much as I didn't want to help her, I realized that she needed to get back to her room, or Simon could be in trouble. Regardless of my instinct to leave her there, I would get Olivia to her room, and then I would go and find Simon. Something wasn't right. My heart squeezed inside my chest. Had I truly messed up again? Dragging Olivia to her room was easier than I expected. I guess the training was paying off for something at least. But it still took time. So as soon as I dropped her off at the palace with the guards, I took off for Simon. He wasn't waiting by the lake for me, even though we hadn't completed training. So I headed to his room. I knocked loudly 3 times and then waited for a response. And waited. I knocked again, and this time the response came quickly. Simon swung the door open and looked down at me. He was still in his suit, so I knew that he hadn't been in bed. I was happy to see that his face was completely cleared up now as well, and was back to its smooth texture. I stared up unabashed into his eyes. They still looked angry, but there was something else in them as well. Loneliness maybe, or maybe dejection. Either way, it hurt me. My heart twinged in, regret. It was supposed to be a prank. What are you doing in here? Why aren't we training? I asked, and then I asked the real question. Why are you upset? I know that the Olivia thing was you, he stated. Yeah, and I still didn't understand where the issue was. It was just a prank. Why did it make you so upset? Do you really not understand? Simon looked incredulous. I thought that men were supposed to be the non-observant one. What's that supposed to mean? I crossed my arms in defense. Nothing, he sighed and stepped out of the room. But you are correct. It is training time, so let us begin. Wait, I said, but he kept walking down the hallway. Wait.
I ran up to catch him and grabbed his elbow to stop him. Before I knew what was happening, Simon spun around and pushed me back and back until he was pinning me against the wall. There was a fire in his eyes again as he breathed on my face. Do you not understand why I would be upset about the Olivia thing at all? He asked heatedly. Why I would not want you, of all people, pushing women at me. Use your head. Alice. I stood there in a daze, stunned by his reaction to my prank. It was just a joke like you did to me earlier. I was just trying to get you back. I mumbled. Yeah, except the difference is that I did it to you. I didn't have some guy come up and do it to you. Simon looked exasperated. What would you have thought if I had William come on to you?
That's different, I said quickly. I don't like William.
Simon paused. He looked down at me in surprise, and I felt my cheeks get hot as I realized what I had just said. We stood there for a moment, and I had to look away. Well, I don't like Olivia, Simon said softer. I glanced back up at him in surprise and saw that he had a small smile on his face. Now, was he saying what I thought he was saying? Man, his mood swings were no joke. It was hard for me to gauge him. But I was starting to feel like maybe he liked me. His body moved off of me so that he was no longer pinning me to the wall. Yet I wish he was. Do you want to go train now? Simon asked, still smiling. All I could manage was a nod. Then I followed him down by the lake. As we approached the lake, Simon stopped and faced me, the grin now gone. We're going to start with attacking. You need to learn how to fight, but defense is just as important. Watch how I defend myself against you and mimic my movements. I laughed. You defend yourself against me. At this, he smirked slightly. Big talk for someone who begged for my help. Now attack. I set up in my stance, getting ready to charge Simon. He never attacked first. He would just watch me and get a feel for how I was going to fight before he would jump in. The perfect, calculated teacher. We danced around for a few moments and then I dove in. Simon was still training me fiercely every night, and I was starting to be able to control my shifts. Even though I still didn't like it, it was how he preferred me to fight. And it was easier just not to argue. Plus, as much as I hated to admit it, when I fought back with my mutations, I did much better at evading him. The strength that came with the wolf gene was unmatched. Damn it. Great job. Alice. Simon cheered as I dodged what would have been a particularly nasty kick from him. My chest swelled in pride as he complimented me. And it made my drive to do even better stronger. I focused for a moment and forced out my claws and teeth, slashing at him simultaneously. Simon jumped back easily. Shy. Even though I had managed to get better at evading him, I still hadn't managed to land a single hit yet. I let out more of the wolf, allowing the wildness, strength, and fierceness burst out of me. I felt more powerful than I ever had in my pathetic little life. I felt in control, powerful, unstoppable. Simon at least looked surprised as I rushed him this time, and I don't know if it was the shock or what, but he didn't dodge out of my way. I felt the blood squirt around my mouth as my wolf teeth dug deep into his shoulder. As soon as I tasted blood, it was as if I came to my senses, and I quickly pulled my teeth out and stared up at Simon with surprise and worry. But Simon was grinning. He leaned down and pressed his forehead against mine. Is it not cool to use the power of a shifter? How do you feel? I feel alive, I answered seriously, but I looked back down at his shoulder that was still bleeding. But I don't like that. I hurt you. How do you feel? Are you okay? Don't worry about me, Alice. Simon said softly. This is all about you and learning not to resist the amazing strength that you have within you. I closed my eyes and focused until the mutations all went away. It's just hard. I sighed. The only thing shifters have been to me is awful. I said honestly, as he had a way of getting it out of me for so many years, I have hated them and therefore hated that side of myself.
What about me? Simon asked, but he looked understanding. Am I not a shifters as well? And have I treated you poorly?
No, I wasn't trying to say that about you. I heard. And do you hate me? He continued. No, of course not. Then you can't hate shifters and you can't hate yourself. He smiled again, and I couldn't help but give a faint smile back. There's more to it than that. I sighed, confessing the truth to him once more. My wolf gene is what killed my mom. Simon stilled and looked at me in surprise. I could see the questions in his eyes. My mother was a human, I explained, and apparently her human body was too frail to survive the labor with me because I came out of her mutated. I felt my eyes sting and was surprised. I hadn't cried my own real tears in years. It had also been a long time since I had cried about my mom. I took a deep breath to calm myself and was surprised to feel Simon wrap his arms around me. At first, I stiffened up, but then I relaxed against his body, accepting the comfort. Suddenly, I had the feeling like someone was watching me. I opened my eyes and glanced around me quickly, but I didn't see anyone, so I shook off the sensation. Then I looked down and balked at the sight of his shoulder. Come on, we need to get you healed up, I said softly. I grabbed his hand on the good arm. I pulled him to his feet. My heart skipped a beat as he squeezed my hand back, and I could feel my cheeks getting warmer as the blood rushed to them. Once we got to his room, I made him sit on the couch and left in search of his first aid supplies. I had happened to be minorly hurt a couple of times at the previous trainings, so I knew that he kept the supplies in the bathroom. It didn't take me long to find them and make my way back with them. And I walked out to find Simon stripping off his suit jacket and the button-up shirt. I stopped in my tracks. This was the first time I would see him not in a full suit. This was the first time I would see him shirtless. Simon turned his head to see me staring at him and slowly continued to remove his shirt with a smile. He pulled it off, obviously trying to tease me. Then his face grimaced in pain, and I walked the rest of the way to help him remove the shirt the rest of the way. I couldn't help but chuckle as I helped him. I focused on his shoulder instead of his bare chest as I cleaned all of the blood off and flushed the deep gouges. It was starting to heal, but I still couldn't get it to stop bleeding. I quickly laid the already blood rag over the top of it and pressed down. Simon hissed out a breath, but other than that, showed no signs of pain. I'm sorry, I apologize. I'm trying to get the bleeding to stop. I'm fine, Simon said, and he sounded like it. He stared at my face, unabashed. I wonder what kind of wolf you would be if you could shift. I stared at him in surprise. I'm not sure. I think you would be gorgeous, he said softly. What does your wolf look like? I quickly asked, trying to distract him from my reddening face. Why don't I just show you? He smiled and stood up. I looked at his bare chest for a moment before he grabbed my hand again and pulled me back out into the moonlight. Then he shifted. Chapter 15. A night out of the palace, Alice's pavilion. A tall, midnight black wolf appeared in front of my eyes. I watched as he rolled his front shoulder, and it seemed to heal in front of my eyes. I knew that healing was accelerated when in wolf form, but that was impressive. The moonlight reflected off of his coat as he walked up to me slowly. He was so handsome. For the first time, I found myself not feeling fear or hatred as I stared into his wolf eyes. Simon must have sensed my comfort or acceptance because he stepped even closer and bowed his back, nudging against me. After a couple more nudges, I realized that he was wanting me to get onto his back. I self-consciously lifted my leg over him and settled behind his shoulder blades. His fur was soft, yet rough at the same time under my hands. I tried my hardest to make sure I wasn't pulling on any of it. It was hard to know what to do when I had never rode on a wolf before. As soon as I was settled, he walked towards the road and out of the palace. Once we were past the gates, Simon took off at full speed. I felt the air leave my chest as I experienced the full speed of a shifter for the first time. The wind was cool on my face as it whipped around me. I couldn't help the smile that spread across my face at the feeling of freedom I was experiencing. Simon left the woods and ran towards the mountain. He showed no signs of tiring as I stared at the beautiful scenery around us. The full moon above gave off enough light to see everything. I never wanted it to end. However, I was realistic as well. I kept my eyes peeled and took in everything that we were passing, trying to keep a photographic memory of it for future reference for when I finally left. He slowed down as we neared a clearing next to the mountain, full of moonlight and wildflower. I slid off when he came to a stop and laid down in the grass, staring up at the clear sky. Simon laid down next to me, back in his human form. We were silent for several minutes, just enjoying the peace that the night brought. Staring at the moon always reminds me of my home. Simon finally said softly, "It reminds me of my past." "Do you miss it?" I asked curiously. "Yes," he said honestly. "What about that girl in the picture in your wallet? Do you miss her?" I saw my shot and I took it. "So you've seen the picture too, huh?" Simon answered. I turned my head and stared at Simon's profile. He continued to watch the sky for a minute, but I stayed silent, waiting for him to answer me. "She was my first love." I couldn't help but ask, was she his mate, like Alan thought? What happened to her? "She married my older brother." I paused, then I couldn't help but laugh out loud and sat up so that I could look down at Simon. He looked surprised at my reaction, but I had not expected that twist. "I'm sorry, but that is crazy." I couldn't stop laughing. What did she not want? An old man show me a picture of your brother. Maybe if it were me, I would choose your brother too. "Trust me," Simon scoffed. "My brother would not like a vicious woman like you. His wife is very kind and gentle. And when I met her, I was only 20 years old. My brother was older than me." He finally added, So his first love was the complete opposite of me, and somehow he had not forgotten her after so many years. For some reason, that pissed me off more than I'd care to admit. Luckily for him, I am such a vicious woman that I don't give up easily. I looked down at Simon to let him see how serious I was. I already get too few things, so if it was me, I definitely would not give up. I will stop at nothing to snatch up what I like. Simon stared at me and stared. But I stayed strong and my gaze stayed firm. Then he sat up with a smile and laughed at me. "I don't think you understand how mate bonds are for a shifter. Simon teased a wolf has only one mate in their life, and it's impossible to come between them. My brother and her are mates, so I had no choice but to throw in the towel." "Oh, trust me," I said with a scoff mocking his earlier statement. "I have plenty of experience with mate bond. Shifters like to swear by it, but as soon as temptation is around, their loyalty wavers. Plenty of mated wolves take one look at me and seem to forget all about their partners. It's all fake." "I don't need to hear about that." Simon growled out, making my insides churn, "and I don't agree with you. It's not fake." "How would you know? Have you ever had a mate?" As much as I was teasing him, I still wanted answers. "No, Simon hesitated. Sometimes I think I'm too broken for a mate. I don't deserve one. I put a hand out and set it on his still bare arm. I could see an angry red splotch on his shoulder, but that was the only remaining sign of his injury. Looking at him now and hearing his honesty, I almost felt bad for how I had teased him earlier. The lady in the picture was not his mate, but he obviously had cared for her deeply and maybe was even still in love with her. Why else would he keep her picture? I sighed. I've only known you for a short period of time, but I can already tell that you have a big heart. Simon looked up at me in surprise as I said this. I know you try to hide it behind this calm and collected mature persona, but just in the way you have treated me, I have discovered your tender, playful, and caring side. You deserve a mate if that is what you want. Do you really want me to find a mate? He asked. I didn't know, did I? No, I said, but then quickly added, but just because I already told you that I think it's fake. Good grief. He rolled his eyes at me and laid back down in the grass. I followed his lead and stared up at the sky once more, glancing at Simon. I noticed that he still had a longing look in his eyes. For the girl or for his home? Tell me about her. I said she's what you were thinking about, right? Actually, I was just thinking about my homeland in general. Simon replied, I haven't been back in years, and lately I have been getting more and more homesick. Why don't you go and visit then? I asked. It's not that easy. Simon paused. I didn't leave on the best of terms. Well, then take me with you and I can help you kick whoever's ass we need to. I smirked. I'm pretty badass and everything now that I actually drew your blood. Sure you are. Simon said with a laugh, though. I do have to admit that you are improving much faster than I expected. I beamed at him. Hearing his praise was an instant mood boost. I'm serious about my offer, though. I restated if you need someone to go with you for moral support. I am here. You just want an excuse to get out of here. Simon said knowingly. That too, I admitted. After a second's pause, Simon spoke again. Thank you. It fell silent once more, and I let his words sit for a moment before continuing. Since we are just being so open and honest right now, are you going to tell me who that lady was on the phone the other day? Another ex-lover, I teased to lighten the mood. No, she is just a family friend, I guess you could say. Simon sighed. Her and her husband basically took me in when I first came here. They even just asked if I would be the godfather of their unborn baby. You a godfather? Are they crazy? I joked some more, trying to keep his mind off of the past that was clearly upsetting him. You don't seem like a kid person to me. You would be surprised, he chuckled, and I was intrigued. Every time I thought I had him figured out, he surprised me. I think I would be a terrible mom. I blurted out suddenly. I had always thought it, but that didn't mean that I needed to tell Simon about it. Why do you say that? He asked with obvious curiosity. I don't know. I shrugged. I come from a pretty broken home where the closest person I have to family is the palace chef. And I just don't think I would be equipped to handle it, or I get worried that I would damage them, like I have been damaged. Plus, it might be a little biased, but I remember when Olivia was a baby and she was the most annoying little shit I had ever seen or heard in my entire life. Simon broke out into laughter and I couldn't help but chuckle too. It took him a while to settle down enough to speak, but when he did, he was back to his usual serious self. If you don't want to be a mom, then that is your choice. But I don't think you would make a bad mom. I think that what you went through gave you a strength and toughness that would make you adaptable to anything. He looked at me and a smirk appeared on his face, but I would have to agree with the Olivia being annoying as shit. Comment. We both started laughing again. It was odd to me that I hadn't truly laughed much at all in the last almost 20 years, but now I couldn't seem to stop, especially around Simon. As we calmed down, we went to staring back up at the sky in silence. It was peaceful and relaxing, almost as if we'd known each other for a long period of time. Simon cleared his throat. I said stopping you from killing James and Olivia is for your own good. I'm serious, Simon stated suddenly. And I was a little surprised. I almost forgot about the entire scene with Olivia and James. It felt like so long ago already. I turned my head in surprise to hear what he had to say. Then I met his gaze, and in the moonlight, it seemed so deep and distant, a little sad. Hatred can make people lose themselves. He continued, I don't want you to be like that. If you want to fight back, I'm here. I'll teach you, I promise. His gaze was locked onto mine and was firm in its approach. I knew he said this for some reason. I should ask something. It would be a good opportunity to learn more about him. And truthfully, there weren't many chances like this for me to get him to open up. However, I avoided it. I didn't want to open old wounds. I was unfamiliar with seeing Simon so dejected and hurt for himself. And for me, Olivia and James, I asked, I'm not interested in killing them. I just want to get out of this damn palace. And now that I'm out, I just want to fully enjoy the rare moonshine bath and forget about them all. I rolled my eyes, spread my hands and feet, and stretched out on the grass. His gaze fell on my face. I felt like things were a lot easier between us, especially after tonight. He laughed, and I was relieved. It's really hard to deny that I was paying more and more attention to how he felt. I blinked my eyes, feeling a sudden exhaustion sweep over me. I shut my eyes, embracing the peace. With a sigh, I rolled over closer to Simon and drifted off to sleep. My first trip outside of the palace was a success. So far. The Alpha King's office? Olivia's pulpit. Thank you, gentlemen. The Alpha King's voice boomed. The guards bowed and walked out, leaving what they had delivered. How is my beautiful daughter? His deep voice took on a soft tone as he addressed his favorite child. How could I not be? I was the ideal heir, unlike James. Hello, father. I beamed, putting on my sweetest voice. I ran over to give him a huge hug. I am better now that I get to see you. What did you call me here for? I saw you earlier this evening hugging Mr. Simon. He always cut straight to the chase. My cheeks reddened and I quickly stepped back, preparing for a scolding. It wasn't what it looked like, I quickly started to say, but my father was quick to cut me off. I'm not mad at you, he said with a smile. I was actually thinking that this is a perfect opportunity. What do you mean, father? I asked, surprised at his manner. It wasn't like him at all to not scold me for going outside of bounds with the teacher. I'd be lying if I said it didn't intrigue me. I've been curious to find out more about this mysterious Mr. Simon, and now you can help me. Again, straight to the point, I want you to follow him, watch what he does, where he goes, who he sees, and tell me anything that you notice. So you want me to stalk him? I asked, my ears perking up at the opportunity he was presenting. Yes, he let out a sigh. Mr. Simon is helping us with our rogue problem. But that doesn't mean that he can't or won't be a problem as well. I do not like the idea of having a man in my pack with unknown history. Better to be prepared. I understand, father, I said, bowing my head. I will do as you wish. My father beamed and placed a kiss on my forehead. That's my girl. For this, I was willing to do anything as long as the Alpha King was happy. This part has ended. Thank you for listening. If you would like to continue listening to the next part, please let me know by leaving a comment.